Redditors whose job requires them to go into other people's houses. What is the weirdest sheet you've seen? Approximate 70-year-old woman fell in her trailer and injured her hip/femur, but was able to drag herself to the couch and climb onto it. Unfortunately, due to her injury, she was unable to walk. Plus the trailer was a disgusting hoarder situation with clutter everywhere, so navigation was already difficult. She sat on the couch in the same spot for approximate 10 days until a neighbor called 911. When we arrived, she was naked and covered in 10 days worth of feces and urine and was physically stuck to the couch. The worst parts were that the rats that also lived in her trailer had eaten 2 toes on the left foot down to the bone and approximate half of her right foot. She had such bad neuropathy that she said she could feel the pressure of them chewing, but no significant pain, and was unable to kick them off. On top of that, she had several sores on her inner upper thighs, along with a skin tear on her right forearm that had live maggots in them. We had to peel her off of the couch, which caused a large portion of skin to slough off as it was dead/decaying after soaking in urine for a prolonged period of time. I've never smelled anything worse than when we broke that seal. The crazy part is that she had a phone near but didn't want to call 911 because she didn't want to spend all day in the hospital. The neighbor that called had been coming over and giving her food and water, but didn't call us for 10 days since she said she didn't want us to, and it didn't seem that bad at the time. I still have a hard time processing it all, but this is just one of many. Edit. Thanks for the awards. If you have elderly family or neighbors, be sure to check in on them when you can. And don't hesitate to call 911 if you truly think someone needs it, even if they don't want you to. Let us show up and we'll sort out the details. Where to start? Point: during my plumbing apprenticeship I worked in North London for the local authority. Our job was to go into houses and update their boilers to new high efficiency boilers. One home was a top floor flat, and we were told in advance that the guy who lived there went by the nickname of Birdman. He was called this because he left his windows open year round, allowing all the pigeons to roost in his place. On approach via the stairway, you could smell the ammonia from the bird sheet. By the time we got to the door we were gagging and called the job off. The local council had to call in deep cleaners in hazmat suits to clean the place before any work would go ahead. Another place a guy lived who I'm pretty sure had some mental health issues. When we got in, he had broken computer parts covering every single square inch of the floor. He said that he wanted us to remove our boots to work there, but we flat out refused on health and safety grounds. Whilst we were there, he spent most of his time on the phone calling local zoos asking what they did with their spare porcupines. He was calling because he wanted to eat them. When they refused, he accused them of being racist as he claimed to be from Africa and it was a delicacy for him. He was a white guy with a North London accent. Not saying he couldn't have been born in Africa and emigrated, but it sounded made up. Point: last was a very friendly family, but their place was a mess. When we got in they offered us tea, which we politely declined. When we got into the kitchen there was dirty cups and plates stacked head high and a decomposing fish on the floor. It was gross. The worst part was having to get in the bedrooms. One room, which was barely big enough for one adult, had 3 adult men staying in. It smelled of old mildew and sweat. When one of the guys got up out of bed to give us the room, his toenails were so long that they made a tapping noise on the laminate flooring, kind of like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. I'm not sharing this to make fun of any of these people. They were clearly living close to or on the poverty line. If anything, I think these type of people need more help from society. Better mental health resources, more living space, and just general wellness checks could all help these people. I was a paramedic and then later a police officer for many years. I've seen enough hoarder situations to last me 10 lifetimes. Probably the most odd thing I've ever seen was in the home of a sweet old elderly couple. Their home alarm went off in the middle of the night due to a malfunction of some sort. This is a very common call. My partner and I showed up, and the couple was very nervous that someone had broken in, so they asked us to do a check of the inside of the home, which we agreed to. The house was pretty big, including a very large finished basement with lots of rooms in a crazy array. It actually reminded me of Buffalo Bill's basement from Silence of the Lambs, but cleaner. We opened one door and found a square room, about 12 x 12 feet. Walls alternating paint blue and red. but the odd bit was the room had nothing in it but a single chair directly in the center, and eye bolts in the concrete floor, one on each corner of the chair. The chair was one of those old school chairs you'd find in a 1960s office or waiting room. It clearly looked like this room was designed for some odd sexual fetish or interrogating Al-Qaeda. I remember when I saw it, I stopped dead and stared. It was so creepy, I felt like I walked into the set of a Kubrick film. My first thought was I'd turn around and find the old homie Arwana with an axe, ready to take my head off. My partner, who was directly behind me, looked in and said, "Well, we just found the discipline chamber." Fortunately he didn't grab my shoulder first, or I might have shot him. Had we not been given permission to search the entire house, I'd have worried there were people captive somewhere in that home. Once upon a time, I worked in law enforcement. Did it for about 10 years. Spent about a year or so in criminal investigations, working special victim type of cases, sexual assaults, molestations, child and elder abuse, neglect, domestic violence, internet crimes against children, working with the state task force, and missing/endangered persons. One day, me and my partner were working on a case of mine about possible child abuse reported by a school. I don't remember the specifics, but I believe it ended up being unfounded. Kid was upset that his box was locked away after doing something and told the school counselor he was being beaten. I spent a month doing random checkups at the school and at home, never found anything out of the ordinary. Anyway, one Saturday, the first time me and my partner stopped by to meet with the family, we got a surprise. The place I worked during this time was pretty rural, fairly low income, in BFE in the southern US. We are sitting at the table, kids are playing Xbox again, grounding was over, so he got it back, chit-chatting. I'm facing the living room and my partner sort of has her back to it. Suddenly I see a brown and black furry creature about the size of a cat go galloping past, but it wasn't a cat that I was sure of. My partner notices that I seem bewildered and asks if I'm okay. "Yo, I think I just saw a damned monkey. Oh, that's just Jerry," the mom says, and gets up to go collect back Jerry. Sure as shit, they've got a faking monkey. They had a larger sized house that allowed for Jerry to have a room all to himself, complete with jungle gym and a hammock thing hanging in the corner to sleep in. I got to hold Jerry. Well, he kind of hung onto my arm for a minute or two like it was a tree branch. Apparently they shit wherever they feel like and can be a bit bitty. The mom said they are more trouble than they're worth. I asked my supervisor later on if I should look into how they got it or consult with a friend of mine who worked for the state's Wildlife and Natural Resources Enforcement, but was told not to push the issue unless we needed to down the road. So me and Jerry got to be brothers for a few weeks whenever I stopped by, and by brothers I mean he was a huge asshole. Hey, I posted this before somewhere, but it fits. I used to work as tidy up man, German speaker, sorry for strange words sometimes, and saw a lot of really strange things in houses, which had to be normal for the people. Maybe the behavior is considered as illness, but it's really strange anyways. So the people were already dead when we cleaned the houses. I was younger back then, and I'd forgot to make pictures. It was 10 years ago. The newspaper couple. An old couple lived in a small flat and the only thing they did was to sort and organize the free newspapers you find in front of your door. But they had a special way to do list. They cutted every headline, every picture out of a bunch of these newspaper, and put them into ring folders. They did for over 40 years. We found papers from the 70s. Every wall in the flat were ring folders. But because on some point they didn't manage to do it right, they started to put the newspapers they still have to do on the floor. The floor in the entire flat was full of newspapers up to 50 centimeters. In their basement we found a small box of plastic filled with stones, sand, and water. It was labeled, scoured, and packed 1968. In German this hits the humor my college, and I had, and we still giggle about that Abgekocht. The bottle lady. She was an retired gynecologist and lived in her old doctor's office. The interior was from the 70s and there was everything like in a normal doctor's office. But she lived in this thing with no bed, no kitchen. She slept on a couch in the waiting room. The only non-doctor's office thing was a TV she placed there. In the laboratories was a fridge for medicines. She also used for food now. She was an alcoholic and drank gin only and brought the same small bottle from a small supermarket, but she didn't throw the empty bottles away. She placed them all over the doctor's office, her home, everywhere, gin bottles on every surface, mountains of gin bottles. She only had a small path from the door to the couch, to the TV, to the toilet and the fridge. A full ceremonial dungeon. In an otherwise incredibly gorgeous multi-million-dollar home on the beach in Hawaii. The home had no solid corners in the entire thing, only colored glass windows in every corner as to have no demonic entities trapped within. And when I say a ceremonial dungeon, I'm not talking about an S&M dungeon. I'm talking about a full-blown literal dungeon room carved out of stone with medieval candle holders on the walls and an enormous long table with high-back chairs. The chair at the end of the table had a round window in the ceiling overhead that looked up to another window in the next ceiling above, which we were told aligned with the full moon on a certain night of the year. So, I'm at least in the top 10 here, right? Because I've been trying to figure that sheet out for like 18 years. What I saw. Edit. Since this got popular, here are a couple more fun details. The courtyard in the middle of the home is shaped like a giant Zeus-style lightning bolt. There is a crazy little Isaac Newton-style observatory on the roof where the final glass window in the floor resides. The dungeon was dug down into the ground and there was this huge light-up spiral staircase, like you'd see at night at the faking Roxbury. Color changing, white plexiglass stairs with a color changing hand railing, like a sludgy Apple store. And big too, like 2 to 3 people could walk down shoulder to shoulder. And then, boom, you're in a faking granite, medieval dungeon. It wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't see. Way back in the day, I worked in legal aid. It was a noble calling, but it was tough and paid nothing. Sometimes, we had to go to the clients' homes if they were physically unable to come to see us. We were on like the 23rd floor of this dilapidated building in downtown Detroit, so it wasn't uncommon to trek out and meet a client. We got a call about a bankruptcy. We usually farmed those out if they were too complicated, but we still had to go. My intrepid paralegal and I trekked out to a house on the east side in one of those neighborhoods that had, for lack of a better phrase, seen better days. Nevertheless, most of the people on the block were trying, mowed lawns, flowers, etc. One house was an absolute mess, lawn like the freaking Great Plains before the Dust Bowl, several shitty cars tossed about, crumpled porch. My paralegal looks at me and says, "That's gotta be them." And of course it was. The couple was nice enough to us after we crawled over the porch, like we were crawling through the trenches in Normandy. Were there trenches there? I don't know. Both were in wheelchairs, raising the question of how the fuck they got out of the house, but I did not even think to ask, because my mind was on something else. The smell. The smell of cat pee. Smell does not even begin to describe it. It was a funk of cat pee. It saturated every crevice of that house, hung to our clothes, draped over my coat. My paralegal was this awesome gunner kind of kid. He was probably 5 years younger, but whatever, and I could tell he was trying so hard to be pleasant. I was too, but OMFG that smell. It was the stench of 1,000 cats from ancient Egypt to Garfield and back again. Somehow, we got the details of the job losses and the sadness and the disabilities and the horrid things that happened to them in their life. All the while, the smell we became the smell. We escaped eventually, fleeing to the car and bringing the smell with us. We did not speak of the smell because no words needed to be said. But, halfway back to the office, paralegal says to me, "Did you see any cats?" Huh? No. No, I did not. We brainstorm, maybe they were in a back room. But no meows, no litter boxes, no cats. I have no idea where the cats were, if they ever existed, or if they were invisible, but that smell was on my clothes so bad that I had to dry clean them. Trust me, I was not wearing dry clean only clothes on $30K a year. I swear the smell lingered in my car, but I don't know if that is true. I just know that I never saw any faking cats in that house. I thankfully don't have to go into people's homes, but my dad does as he works for an internet company in the Midwest. The area he works in is full of interesting people. I know I've heard dozens of stories of the horrors of other people's houses, but aside from the elderly men that brick their computer with porn and claim they don't watch that stuff, or clear hoarders with fesses everywhere insisting he takes his shoes off in the house, he never would. He always tells people that it isn't allowed by his company for insurance reasons. One story from my teenage years sticks out more than others. He visited a middle-aged woman's house who was complaining about her internet not working. Pretty standard stuff. He showed up, noticed the inside of the house reeked of shit, and was told the modem is downstairs, and led to the basement. The lady told him, "Careful, we've been keeping our puppy downstairs because he likes to bite." Bit of a red flag, but my dad still decided to go downstairs. Told us that everything in the basement was soaked in urine and covered in dog shit, but found it a little odd that after 10 minutes or so the dog hadn't appeared. Didn't think much of it and continued to work on the job at hand. As he tracked some of the cables, he stumbled upon a python he described as being about 5 to 6 feet long, and soon saw another in the basement. One was moving freely, but the other had quite a large object in its stomach that kept it mostly stationary. He then left the home without fixing the internet, citing it to his work as a danger to his safety, and never had to return. Never had to go into someone's house for the job, just delivering onto their roof, roofing shingles. But one house always sticks out to me. We get there to deliver, should be there 45 minutes at the most. Semi-small town, maybe 2,000 pop maximum, surrounded by nothing, so the house isn't anything crazy. Homie Arwana greets us and says he'll be in the detached garage and some friends will be coming over. He looks to be around 50, long white beard, little overweight with overalls. Pretty normal for the area. Tall lanky guy in his mid-40s comes over, fits the same rural Midwestern America look as the homie Arwana. Then a kid no older than 16 or 17 who seems to be trying to look like a gangster with a pit bull shows up and walks into the garage. I just think he doesn't seem like the type to be friends with these guys, but whatever. So I'm on the truck next to the garage sending shingles up to my partner, who is on the roof of the house. Suddenly dense white smoke is coming out of the smokestack to the garage and smells like cat piss. My partner asks, "Does that smoke smell like cat piss?" When I tell him yes, he says they are definitely cooking meth in there. So we decide to kick our pace up a notch and knock out the job in less than 30 minutes. As we're strapping the truck back down, the homeowner strolls out to thank us, and the tall lanky dude walks out behind him smoking a meth pipe in the open. No facts given. Like, holy shit dude, is this okay? Are we in danger? Is this homie Arwana about to tell us not to mention anything we see here? Just note the fact out to there. P.S. As an added bonus while delivering, we heard the neighbors across the street yelling, glass shattering, a woman running away, then a guy sitting on the front porch pretty obviously holding a pistol. Glad I never went back to that town. I've already left one comment, but here's another. Trigger warning, dead person and somewhat nastiness. I'll try to be polite about my descriptions, but you have been warned. Again, was a cop for a while years ago. Spend most for my time working on patrol. The guy who shows up when someone calls the cops. One of the calls we got frequently were welfare checks. Someone calling asking us to check on another person for whatever reason. These could range from an aid where an older person forgot to call into our dispatch program that kept an eye on seniors living alone, to, occasionally, someone attempting to harass another person by sending the cops out. Think domestic issues and such. Sending us out to do their dirty work, none the wiser, and finally to situations like this story, where a person had not been heard from in some time. In this particular case, a man lived alone, and had some type of terminal illness. He had no family or friend in the area. A friend drove from a few days out of town after not being able to reach the man for almost 2 months. After finding the man's car in the driveway, but no answer at the door, and not seeing anything in the window, he calls us. After hearing the above description on the radio, I already know what time it is, and tell the dispatcher to give a call over to the M station closest and wake them up. But don't dispatch them yet, let them get a chance to have a cup of coffee or something, since it's gonna be a long few hours, and it was very AM. Get there, talk to the complainant, he already knows what's up as well. make attempts to get an answer at the door, and the sergeant give the go ahead and boot the door. Well, not really boot it. The other guy on scene had one of those Halligan tools, since he was a volunteer firefighter. Once the door is open, I'm immediately met at the door by a poor medium-sized dog who is skin and bones. He is very happy to see us. The smell is immediately apparent, and the complainant backs off a bit while we continue inside. The other officer with me is relatively new and had not had this kind of situation yet from either law enforcement or volunteer firefighting, so he is a bit more struck by the smell than I was, but it was still quite overpowering. Though I had come prepared with a surgical mask and a swipe of Vaseline right under my nose, but it was cutting right through it. We continue in, me taking the lead followed by my reluctant rookie. We find another very skinny but happy dog in the hallway. We make it to what appears to be a bedroom, door shut. I can almost see fumes of decaying odor come out from under the door, or maybe the powerful stench is starting to make me somewhat delirious. The rookie pleads with me, please, don't make me open it. I nod for him to do it. He pushes, but meets resistance. Again, still resistance. We push together till we get it cracked. I shine my light through and see him dead right there. Open it a little more so I can squeeze through. Since I was much smaller than my coworker, I get in just enough to confirm with the back of my hand that he is cold before I see that he appeared to be melting somewhat. He'd obviously been here for a bit. It then occurred to me that the complaint mentioned 3 dogs and a cat. I found the third dog, a little Pomeranian type, fur-matted, had been locked in the room with the deceased. Fat and happy. Yes, if you get my drift, that is exactly what happened. When EMS showed up, along with the coroner, we were able to get the door all the way open. As they started packaging him up, or attempting to, the coroner described to the EMTs that meat just falls off the bone after a little, while the rookie handed me his flashlight and FOD the hell out of there. We saw that it appeared that something had been eating off portions of tender skin and muscle, in some places down to the bone. I stood there and held the 2 flashlights while they did their best to collect the poor man. I tried not to watch, but the coroner would occasionally bark at me to keep the lights on the body so they could see. Even the EMTs seemed to be a little queasy after a bit, but the coroner was unfazed. I felt really bad for the guy, for the dogs, for the friend. I was a crappy situation to go out like that. For months afterward I would catch a whiff of something, and it would remind me of that smell. Never did find the cat though. This is a different speed to most other posts in this thread, but I heard Reddit likes potatoes. So, when I was in high school, I did in-home peer tutoring, usually for kids from my church, whose parents had heard I was a dork. My senior year, I worked with one of the most popular guys in school, varsity in multiple sports, homecoming king, all that jazz. My dude kept a vase full of potatoes on his desk at all times. One of those tall as long vases you might put over a pillar candle in a wedding centerpiece. I went to his house practically every single week for an entire school year, and every time, there were basic, boring as russet potatoes filling this ornamental vase. I'm pretty sure the potatoes were changed periodically, as they never rotted or grew eyes, but I don't think he was snacking on them either, because his mom strictly forbade any eating outside of the kitchen, including relatively clean things like apples or carrots. Why she tolerated the potatoes remains a mystery. This was way before camera phones, so I couldn't snap pictures to compare week to week or anything. He was actually an incredibly nice guy, not at all your stereotypically mean high school movie jock. He probably would have been happy to tell me what was up with the potatoes, but he never volunteered an explanation, and, for some reason, I'd convinced myself that it'd be weird to ask. Like, what if desk potatoes were a thing at my school, and I was out of the loop? Or what if his dearly departed grandpa had been a potato farmer or something, and it'd be a painful memory? Obviously none of that makes any sense, but I was a very anxious teenager, with a bit of a crush, to be honest, and got super in my head about the whole thing until, eventually, I simply could not bring myself to ask the coolest kid in school about his desk potatoes. They remain a mystery to this day. Worked for a subcontractor of an energy company. Basically doing gas meter maintenance, really just swapping out the battery in the unit. Anyways, I walked around with a unit that gave me the address and the location of the meter, i.e. inside, east wall. Sounds easy enough. Except when you worked in rougher areas. This was the best thing I seen in my life. Knocked on the door and this little old lady answered. She seemed sweet enough. I told her what I was there for, showed her the unit, that showed me the meter was in the basement and I just needed 5 minutes or so to swap a battery. She was fine with it, and led me to the stairs. She was in rough shape, and opted not to walk down with me. Not a big deal, since there really wasn't a point to her standing around while I swap a battery out. On my journey to the meter I passed a table with the biggest bowl of weed I've ever seen in my life. I don't mean a bowl in the sense of what you pack for a bong hit. I mean like one of those 8-quart Pyrex bowls. This thing was mounded and overflowing onto the round 4-person table. Then I heard it. A door open sheet. Some wannabe drug lord weed dealer is going to beat the brakes off me cause I was let into his den. Some 14-year-old looking kid walked out, flipped the fuck out on me with the "get the fuck out of here" and some other shrill high-pitched squealing. I didn't get to do my job. Marked the house as can't access and left. I'm sad I didn't get to at least tell them it's cool and buy some off them. This was in maybe 2008 or 2009. Oh, this post was written for me. Hoarders definitely. I've worked in almost all the states, so I could be talking about your neighbor. All of these are death scenes I've personally been to. Buckle up, this could be fun. Mail in late 60s well-being check. Package delivery guy called as a package delivered 5 days earlier wasn't touched. Found suspended naked from his enforced ceiling beams by waist, thighs and wrists in crawling position. No furniture in room. Smooth wooden floor, full length mirrored walls. With over 100 different sized and shaped dildos suction cupped in various places so he could swing into them. Pulled up to a home that police and firefighters refused to stay inside. Rolled my eyes at these guys and walked into a female that passed from natural causes. On her clear plexiglass false floor with thousands of doll heads staring up at us. What the fuck? One of the other rooms in the house was all clowns. Fastest clear time in that house. Then as a medic, one houser guy fell off his roof, injured but not life-threatening. Super clean houseman worked in public service, said his pet was in the room off the kitchen and needed to be fed. Lunch was beamed in the top shelf of the fridge in that room. Was insisting to keep the door shut. I'm a farm girl, so I figured he had a litter of kittens or pups in his suburban neighborhood home, so I went to fed them. No smells or anything less than shiny in this house. Walk in the room and close the door. Pull the bin from the fridge, confused as it was about 20 pounds of raw meat, to turn around and see a 5-foot alligator sunbathing in a tub-like setup. My dumbass froze and then threw the bin down and ran. Alligator did nothing. Fairly sure he didn't care. The man had an exotic rescue license and a headache from my screaming. The rest of the crew had a great laugh. Hey, I can do this one. I work in apartments, management, and renovations. I've seen some absolutely crazy stuff, from people living with 10,000 roaches. It was an old lady with quite a few cats, literally walked in, and the floors moved type of stuff. That was also our pest control's estimate, not mine, to a dude that built a rock wall in his own house. Highlights of what I've seen. Doing apartment inspections. Guy wasn't home. Had a single chair in the middle of the room, a TV and box plugged into a socket on the floor, a single mattress with only sheets, and maybe 6 to 8 empty 30 packs of natural light with hundreds of beer cans everywhere with random half-decayed food. We had to talk about whether or not we should do a health and safety violation with that. A dude had maybe 50 lizards and reptiles lining the walls of his house. He apparently used them for educational purposes and brought out his 9-foot snake, no idea what it was, and freaked out one of our investors' people. Really cool guy. Walked in on just 2 dudes hitting a bong. I guess they didn't hear us when we knocked, so we had to just go in. They immediately ran into their rooms coughing like mad, trying to hide everything. Walked into an apartment stacked to the walls with trash. We couldn't even get to the second bedroom. We had to do a health and safety violation, it was so bad. Those smells still haunt me. Went into an apartment and everyone had just forgot we were coming. We post 48-hour notices, and when I walked in and knocked on one of the bedroom doors, a guy opens it, his eyes go wide, and just yells, "Somebody is in our house, mom." Went into an apartment of somebody who was murdered with a hammer to see if we wanted to trash all the appliances due to the blood. We definitely trashed all of those. That was really messed up to see the mark where the blood pooled. Some people weren't home when we went in and apparently forgot about the notice saying we were coming in. We found basically a crack house, needles everywhere, tinfoil with black in the center, crack pipes, whole shebang. We eventually non-renewed them for serious lease violations. That was nerve-wracking trying not to have one go through my shoe. I already mentioned him, but Rockwall guy was cool. We walked in and were like, oh my god, this is so cool. He told us some stuff about him traveling the world. It was cool. I've got some more stories if people are really interested. I've seen some insane stuff so far. I worked in safeguarding and had some concerns about a young boy we looked after at school. He was underweight, very skinny, his hygiene was awful, and he appeared not to have slept for quite a while, and we hadn't seen his mother in quite some time. He had transport to and from school, but no concerns by the taxi driver. A lot of red flags. He was very angry, tired, anxious, and refused to talk about how things were at home. Their phone was disconnected. I accompanied a social worker to their home to be told they'd moved out a few months ago, but they knew where they had moved to. It was a small caravan parked at the edge of a local fishing pond hiding in the trees. The boy's father was not well, but was doing his best for his son. The mother passed away quickly from pancreatic cancer when he returned from Afghanistan and was struggling hard with PTSD from being there and being widowed so suddenly. They lost their home and barely had enough to eat, but he truly tried hard. Where they were living was just awful. Everything was dirty, flea infested, but the boy's clothes, bed, backpack and belongings were immaculate. He was terrified of letting the school know about his mother as he felt his well-documented mental health problems would mean he would lose his boy too. He needn't have worried. We arranged for help to clean up the living space in the meantime, while the social worker and I tried to find a refuge. Harder than you think, because most refuges/shelters are mothers with kids and many do not allow men, because a lot of them are there at the hands of a domestic violence situation, and a homeless shelter wouldn't be appropriate for the boy to stay in. I arranged for him to get an appointment with Citizens Advice, to get him set up with financial support. The ladies in the school kitchen sent the little one home with a care package of food every day. We washed their clothes in the school's washing machine. Happy to report that the boy and his dad are doing great now. It took a few months to get back on his feet and working again, and now they have their own place. The boy's healthy and happy and the dad is doing much better with support from a veterans group and grief counseling provided by social services. Their GP prescribed a membership to the local gym so they could shower there. This was new to me. Removing the child is always the last option. If the father wasn't willing to change the situation and the boy wasn't being looked after, it would have been very different. But it wasn't a case of willful neglect or abuse. No drug or alcohol abuse. No violence or emotional abuse. The guy was just sinking in grief and despair. Just existing day to day, but he was determined to do better, and our assessments made it clear that there was no other concerns other than the place they were living. Things just got out of his control. I'm so glad it worked out, but I'll never forget how bad their living space was. Grief is a powerful thing in itself. Without added trauma and PTSD, it can be very hard to climb back up from grief like that, but he did it. What a guy to overcome that all in the space of around 6 months. Did some work for the Royal British Legion at one time, a charity that looks out for old soldiers on hard times. Most of them were a bit lost, a fair few alkies, loads of Gurkhas, and several outright lunatics. One had been arrested for waving a knife at Buckingham Palace in his old uniform, had sheet all over his bathroom, but read me a nice poem called Revolution. Julie was a trans lady we delivered to who is possibly the hardest person I've ever met. Had a tattoo on her finger stump, and told us loads of stories about unfortunate homophones picking fights with her. Apparently lost her tackle in Gulf War I and just went with it. Made a lovely cup of tea. And then there was the elderly gentleman we laid a carpet for. On moving his TV stand it spilled easily 100 hardcore gay VHS cassettes onto the floor. He seemed embarrassed, but we just tidied it up and said nout. Delivering furniture to a local halfway house, we had the pleasure of meeting such dwarf who had awful hygiene and a penchant for pasting hardcore porn to his walls, as well as a poster and box set of Only Fools and Horses. The lady who had hung porcelain dolls from every square inch of her ceiling. More than a few hoarders. And oh my god, the dildos we'd find. Many and various. So fairly tame, but kind of interesting. I was a visiting home health nurse specializing in psych care. So this is sad, but also really odd. A very brilliant woman had a stroke and was now under the care of her 80-ish-year-old mother. The woman was now like a child. It was so sad. They would only let me on the bench by the front door and never in the house, but my job is to inspect the house, so they let me in once. They were hoarders, but fairly neat ones. I looked into getting things taken care of there. Turns out the other daughter was there 3 months prior and had things cleaned up. The neighbor also checked on them. The mother was pretty ornery. My patient was very sweet. It was a shame her stroke was so severe. Every visit I would stop in the driveway to finish paperwork and the patient would come to the car window to see when I'd be done. After a bit I started stopping down the street under the shade of a large oak tree so I wouldn't be bothered. Well, one day I decided just to go straight there. I pull up, and sitting on the bench is the mother, not my patient. I get out immediately and ask where my patient was at. The mother replied, she's in her room. She didn't get up for her pills all afternoon yesterday, and all day today. It was 1 p.m. I bolt past her to find her daughter barely breathing on the floor of her bedroom sitting in half-dry piss. She had pulse, and was breathing erratically. I called 911 and tried to get her on her side, since it looked like she had thrown up. She seemed to know I was there but couldn't move. I then spent the rest of the time yelling at the mother while I chucked old magazines and newspapers to the side to make room for rescue to get to her. I demanded to know why she hadn't already called 911 when her daughter was clearly dying on the floor. Her answer, "Oh, I thought you were coming." I yelled more. Rescue showed up and took her to the hospital. I called DCF and the patient's neighbor called me a few days later to tell me my patient had made it and they were making other living arrangements for her. I swear that old lady was hoping her daughter died before I got there. She wasn't stupid. A few summers ago I was doing some mover/manual labor jobs. This was a period of my life when I was attracted to the idea of a toxic lifestyle because I idolized shows like Shameless and desperately wanted to distance myself from my straight-edged conservative Christian background. Owners of this particular house were the parents of a friend, but people I had never known outside of a conversation here or there. They were in their late 50s, and their son was 19 at the time, about the same age as me. House was an old, nice looking house from the outside, had the appearance of one of those California ranch style homes from the 40s 50s. The front porch had some beer cans and cigarette butts on the floor, but nothing that screamed excess or mental illness, just kinda normal for where I'm from. The first thing I noticed was several missing panels from the window in the front door, which the owner would later tell me had been headbutted by a friend of their child's while under the influence. The front room of the house was almost completely devoid of furniture, except a couch in one corner that was covered in small pieces of feces and what I assumed was dog hair. The front room had multiple holes in the walls from being punched/headbutted ECT, and I remember there was plaster everywhere. Imagine what it would like if a pit bull got its hands on a bunch of stuffed animals and went to town, but plaster instead of stuffing. This house was like something from R/Backrooms. It was one connected room after another, with seemingly no rhyme or reason given to its layout. The next in the string of rooms that would make Stephen King proud was the kitchen. Every cabinet/drawer was empty, the counter piled with dishes that were covered in an unidentifiable grime that was once the residue of leftover food. There was a thick layer of this grime in the sink, and around the burners on the stove, and dishes and trash, utensils and old boxes of beer lay everywhere. The one piece of furniture in the kitchen was an old 70s/80s style breakfast room table with no chairs, which was covered in the same grime. A cat tree sat in one corner of the kitchen next to a door to the driveway that looked as though it hadn't been opened in 10 years from the amount of grime and dust cakes onto it. The thing that stuck out to me the most was a singular shelf above the table, lined with empty bottles of long-gone booze, like a late middle-aged crisis college dorm. The next room was the bathroom. No trash can, empty medicine cabinet, an empty roll of toilet paper in the wall, and a pile of used toilet paper taller than the toilet between the sink and the wall. The bathtub was full of dishes soaking in a brownish filth, and the floor, per tradition at this point, was covered in tiny pellets of sheet. There was, what looked like, a giant hamster ball in one corner of the room, which I would later learn, was for their 2 ferrets. I also remember a broken children's camp chair leaning up against the water heater next to the tub. This room smelled worse than the bathroom, but not as bad as the first bedroom, where the family kept their pet ferrets. Anyone who has owned one will know that ferrets are great pets, but they stink. Like, even if they are in hygienic conditions, those boys are smelly. The room they were kept in was the worst in terms of hoarding/trash, the only path being from the front door of the room to the back door of the house, and a path from the front door, along the bed, and up to the box under the TV. Besides that, there was a small couch and coffee table, completely surrounded by your average array of garbage, takeout, plates and utensils. I remember most of all a mattress sticking out of the closet which had a massive blood stain on it, and pus stains running down from top to bottom like a cat's version of the sheet stains birds leave running down the Walmart logo. The overgrown backyard was filled with children's toys and garbage, and their shed was filled floor to ceiling with trash they hadn't got around to tossing. Out of all this shit, one of the rooms that stuck out to me most was between the hallway and the room I just described, because it was just your average teenage girl's bedroom. It was comparatively clean, had a string of lights around the window, a nice mirror in the corner, and in general looked pleasant. The only odd thing about this room was on the wall opposite the door to the back bedroom, there were names and random messages written on the wall. Nothing horror movie-esque, but strange nonetheless. I never got to see the main bedroom of the house, but for the sake of the memory, kinda wish I had. Sorry for the rambling description, I've never had the opportunity to really describe it, or talk about, and the memory is still so visceral from a time in my life, where I didn't know what I was doing, or where my life was going. One of the late nights cleaning the house one of the friend helping ended up doing cocaine on the second floor with the woman who rented it. A few nights later we got drunk on said second floor and the owner of the house, who we'll call Thomas, offered to suck my dick for $50. I declined, and never worked on that house again. Husband and wife are now divorced, with the wife getting custody of the kids, and moving to California. Thomas is now moved to a town nearby, and dating a man his own age who has the same name as me. What a faking life If anyone made it this far, thanks for taking the burden of having to read about one of the weirdest times in my life. Being part of that house's history was like being a guest star on Shameless and getting killed halfway through a season. I don't know what to say now. I hope you enjoyed. Additional cursed information. Youngest child used to smoke matches because he thought it was getting him high. Underage daughter was dating a 25-year-old drug dealer who was found dead a few months after the house was sold. Said daughter's chihuahua jumped from a moving truck out front of the house and broke its neck. I had a threesome in one of the bedrooms in the weeks spent there. Friend of youngest child was on acid when he headbutted the window, was 13 to 14 at the time. There's a lot more to this story that I really probably shouldn't put out onto the internet. Second to youngest son of the family went missing. I contracted and standard by having sex with a friend of the oldest son in the back room with the puss mattress. Yes, this story, and me including, are disgusting. TLDR, mover helping a friend's parents whose house I had never been to before, sheet and grime everywhere, signs of domestic violence and mental illness. Owner offered to suck my dick for $50. What I assumed to be rat pellets turned out to be 2 ferrets who weren't looked after. I regret putting any of this information out onto the internet, and I hope this comment gets buried. Edits, some spelling errors and corrected info. I work in market research where I, pre-pandemic, traveled around the world going into people's homes for interviews that last about 2 to 3 hours. It's hard to nail down any 1 or 2 moments of weird, but there have been lots from all over. Though I will say that for the most part people aren't that bad, and it's pretty rare that a place is really bad, and even rarer that it's to the point where you really want to just cancel and walk away. So yeah, I've got some weird ones, but honestly I've got way more cool ones of really fascinating people. Plus getting to travel the world and see how people actually live in places I go and not just tourist stuff is really cool. Dirty houses aren't too rare, but there's been a couple where we walked into basically hoarder status homes and had to bail. One time that really sucked was when I had to keep the person's dog from climbing all over our client, but the dog was gross and scabby. But we were recording, and if the dog was in the other room it would bark its head off endlessly. I've seen some people who have very random collections of obscure items, and some less obscure, that they swear up and down will make them tons of money one day. There was one person who didn't tell us, because it didn't come up, that they had a hairless cat, and so randomly in the middle of her talking this odd demon-like tail came out from behind them, and started flicking around, and seemed to match their cadence and tone. We were very confused, until they pulled their hairless cat out from behind them on the couch. One house I went to had every surface you could think of completely covered in something having to do with sunflowers. I'm talking the wallpapers, tablecloths, dishes, mats, coffee table, everything. I've also seen a home that was full of chipped and broken wooden furniture and the person insisted that it was their style and they loved the look of it all. It literally looked like it came out of a dump, and they would purposefully do it to their furniture when they got it. One person insisted on meeting us in a hotel that they wanted to book down the street from their house because for whatever reason they didn't want us in their house. But the study needed to include their home tech, so yeah, that didn't work out. One time we interviewed someone in such a tiny studio, I believe this was Paris, that 2 of our team had to be in their bathroom, one literally just sitting on the closed toilet. But yeah, tons and tons of really cool people too. Majority actually, like a dude who custom built his own smoker and got super into it, or a dude who taps the maple trees on his land for his own syrup, or someone who made custom skateboards custom designed icons for each member of their family. One of the funniest moments was when we interviewed a younger person in a really tiny studio apartment. Started the interview with a cup of Starbucks next to them. At one point said, "Oh, can you excuse me for a minute? Sorry." Went into the bathroom that was all of 2 feet away from where we had to sit, turned on the water faucet, and proceeded to drop a big old deuce. Took a decent chunk of time. Then came out, looked at us, and just said sorry about that. Had to make a business call. We thought it was so funny we to this day use that as code for when we want to go back to our hotel and take a sheet. Hey guys, let's swing past the hotel, I gotta make a business call. I was an inspector for a housing insurance company. My area was Putnam and Westchester counties in New York. So every other week I'd have to drive out about 6 hours and do inspections on various residences for a week. The inspections would be an exterior survey of the property, take measurements of the perimeter, and take notes of the structure and integrity of the home. If the residents were home, I'd ask to look in the basement and take a pic of their circuit box. I did this gig for about 3 months. Because as things went on, I realized I was getting more and more shitty areas / houses to inspect. I suspected the general manager didn't like me much because he thinks his wife made a pass at me, but I digress. One of the last inspections I did was in this semi-trailer park-like area, although they weren't trailers, just rundown single-story homes. I was having a hard time locating a house I was to survey, so I stopped and asked a woman walking her dog which house it was. She pointed in a direction and said something to the effect of way in the back, keep going around the bend. I pulled up to a small brown house with a covered porch. I got out and walked up to the porch and realized it was infested with giant carpenter bees. Humongous bees. I stood there for a few minutes and I hear a woman and man inside screaming. Then one of the largest men I've ever seen comes out of the front door, through the bees and approaches the steps. He was about 6'5" and 500 lbs wearing just overalls, no shirt and walking with a cane. I'd guess he was in his 60s. I told him why I was there and he asked me to come inside. I hadn't asked yet, so he shuffles back inside and I ran through the bees in the door. I was hit in the face by some awful smell of cat shit and urine and dank old rotting magazines. As I walked through the living room they had piles to near the ceiling of magazines everywhere. The ceiling was drooping and peeling paint. Snapped a few pics and asked to see the basement. I was led outside to those outdoor entries where you lift the 2 large doors on the ground. He told me to go first. In my mind I said, yay, I saw this movie, no way. But I mustered the courage and started down the stone steps. I got a few steps down and started looking at the floor. It looked weird. I couldn't place it. I didn't look like a regular floor, and as I got closer and closer the more off it looked. I just couldn't tell what it was. Then I took my final step and sank about 1.5 feet deep in water. Holy shit, the floor I was looking at was still water. As I turned to nope the fuck out, I nearly ran into the guy who was literally a step behind me. As I bumped him, he tried to turn around, but was falling backward. Either this is it, this is how I go out, crushed and drowned by a huge fat guy, but I pushed him back before he fell on me. He got his footing and walked back up the stairs. I ran back to my car and took off back to my hotel room. I quit a couple weeks later. I was a maintenance assistant for a couple years, and there were lots of things that weren't conventionally weird but just odd. One old lady had probably $2,000 in a smaller 2-bedroom apartment. Every room had bookshelves with dolls of all kinds. Precious Moments, American Girl, ECT. I can't fathom how much that all cost her, but I bet it's a huge reason why she was in a small apartment rather than a house. Another guy was on the spectrum and had OCD. Great guy, absolutely hilarious. But he would call over everything. He found one nail on the trim in the hallway that stuck out maybe 1/16 inches. He asked us to pound it flush. There was a chip on the tile in the bathroom. He needed it to be caulked and then painted as close to the color of the tile as possible. And the guy would stand outside on windy days in the fall and sweep leaves off his sidewalk and in front of his garage. Oh, and he had a massive collection of retro baseball cards, like pre-1960s stuff. Just a very fascinating guy. I'll take the bait, though. I was outside and didn't see it myself, but my dad, apartment supervisor, and his friend, apartment owner, went into a unit to change the stove. The tenants, a young couple, must forgotten we were coming that day. On a dry erase board, the wife drew a very detailed picture of a woman giving a guy head, with the caption, "I can't wait to suck your huge cork when you get home." My dad and his friend walked out, laughing so hard that I thought they were going to die. Alright, as a medic I've seen some really bizarre stuff. Everything from hoarders to neglect cases that make me cringe to this day. But there was one house that really creeped me out. We got called late at night for a cardiac arrest way out in the Bohemians, so we knew we would just be going out there ultimately to pronounce death. Finally arrived at this totally trashed residence with all the usual hoarder detritus scattered in and around the place. The young man who had called us was distraught, knowing that his mother was beyond help at this point, and he took us inside. The whole house was just hideous, piles of trash and rotting food that made getting around a challenge. We found his mother deceased in her bedroom, which was completely filled with dolls and clown toys / figurines. Shelves had been built on all the walls, and every one was crammed full of these porcelain dolls that just seemed to stare down at you. Had to be hundreds of them. Meanwhile, the son was having a total meltdown and insisting on trying to move his mother's body outside and trying to gather her jewelry. So I and a firefighter basically had to stand guard in the bedroom while everyone else tried to corral the son while we waited for law enforcement to arrive. As we were standing there in the bedroom, being thoroughly creeped out by the dolls, I shit you not, I thought I saw one of them move. I pointed it out to the firefighter and suddenly the whole shelf seemed to come alive, all of the dolls moving and jittering as I totally kept my cool and did not scream like a little girl at all, despite statements to the contrary. Turns out there were big fat rats running around in the shelves behind the dolls. I've never noped out of somewhere faster than I did that day. Turns out part of the reason the son wanted to take the body outside was that he didn't want the rats to get to her. Post-COVID and vaccine era, home vaccinations are popping up. You call the state hotline, make an appointment, a third-party company confirms these appointments, then sends people to your house to vaccinate you. I'm here going house to house vaccinating people. One apartment I stepped into, I was greeted by this grotesque smell that I can't describe. Open the door further and see a super aggressive 28-year-old kid running around the house, breaking stuff, drinking everything in sight, and spilling it everywhere. As I'm walking, I notice the ground is sticky, but I can't comprehend what it is. The owners are barefooted, so it can't be that bad. There's a yellow film on the floor with brown speckles everywhere. Step into the living room trying to hold my breath. I see 2 mattresses with no covers, nothing else in the room. The dad is sitting on one mattress looking disheveled and half dressed. The mother is standing right in front of me begging me to vaccinate her son. The second mattress was yellow and brown, and visibly wet, soaked through and through. The top of the mattress had lumps of wet and dried sheet all over. I looked on the floor, and it dawned on me what I was stepping on, what was so smelly and sticky. I told the mother I can't vaccinate her son if he's running around wilding and being aggressive. She begs me to sedate her son and vaccinate him. I noped out of there and tell her to clean up the house and call back when her son is not being aggressive. I used to be a videographer. We filmed in so many nondescript offices and homes. But for one shoot, we were hired to produce a promotional film for a growing housing development around a lake in rural Texas. There were no hotels in the area where the client, rich landowner, could put us up. Instead, they invited us to stay at their house. Given that we had a 7-person crew, I thought this sounded odd. And then we got to the house. It was gated. At least 20 acres of land, which included a 9-hole golf course. But the house itself was unreal. It was made of stone, and the decor would best be described as Harry Potter meets cowboy chic. The dining room table was 50 feet long, and was covered in wax mountains from all the candles that had been on it. There were multiple game rooms, video games, a pool table, slot machines, etc. The fireplace was big enough that 4 to 5 people could stand in it. If I recall correctly, it slept 70 people. There was a bar that was behind a giant locked iron gate. They had countless bedrooms with bunk beds, designed so the family's kids could have big parties. The owners were gone. They just let us take over the house. So we wandered around and eventually found an underground concrete bunker with more video arcade games in it, as well as a theater. Not a movie theater, but the kind where actors perform on stage. We went in the garage and found a live monkey in a cage. We later discovered a kangaroo wandering around. Then it got weirder. We heard there were secret rooms and passages. We figured it was just a joke/myth. But then one night, while we were drinking tequila at the 70-seat dining table, we found a barrel of maps. Yes, a barrel, and it was filled with maps. I unrolled a few, and eventually found one that wasn't a map. It was a blueprint on the house, and it showed that there were secret rooms. We began exploring, and eventually found them. One was behind a fake bookcase, and then in that room, there was another fake bookcase. If you found the switch, the bookcase lifted up into the ceiling, revealing another tiny room filled with magic tricks. Then we found a secret room hidden behind a grate in the hallway on the 3rd floor. It led to, I'm not kidding, a slide. You lay down in the slide, pushed yourself into the darkness, and flew down 2 stories, around twists and turns, all in pitch black, and then came to a stop in another secret room behind the spice rack in the kitchen. But the creepiest thing was discovering a secret tunnel that wrapped around the entire perimeter of the house, which had multiple secret doors into various bedrooms. You could travel on your hands and knees from bedroom to bedroom, entering and escaping through secret doors built into closets and shelves. Our little crew, fueled by tequila, crawled through the tunnel system, which at times required climbing up ladders and ramps to go from floor to floor. At times, you could very easily peer out of grating and into a room, meaning that you could spy on people from the tunnels. But my favorite detail is that they had a framed photo of Hillary Clinton photoshopped onto the body of some BDSM model right in the entryway. Right, Texans are faking weird people. I install HVAC. A middle-aged Asian, we guessed Korean, guy that had an entire collection of Sailor Moon and other animes paraphernalia, including 2 locked glass cases of action figures. He also had a ton of cosplay girl pictures on the walls. That was weird, but nothing too crazy. Then we go into a room to hang a unit, and there is mannequin all done up in a female outfit with an entire female wardrobe. Kinda weird, but we figured maybe he had a wife/girlfriend that we just hadn't seen. Then we go into the basement to run wires, and this is where it gets really weird. The entire basement is painted for children in a circus theme. Really bright colors, polka dot rugs, racetracks and doll houses, and in the corners is a wall full of women's shoes. It creeped all of us out, and we all started to look at all the photos to see if we saw any women or kids. The dude really didn't have any photos of himself or any kind of family. Any photos out were basically just fan art and cosplay girls. We spent all week making up crazy theories about this guy being a serial killer or into weird kinks, but never did get any answers. The guy ended up being really nice, albeit a little social awkward, and never gave off an creepy vibes, but goddamn, that house was weird. My favorite customer quote that I've heard far too many people say to believe it ever. I didn't have time to clean before you showed up. Literally fezzes all over the floor, bugs crawling around everywhere, cockroaches inside their electronics. My only thought, how do people live like this? I've been to places that have no door knobs, not because they removed them, they'd all been shot out with a shotgun. There wasn't even a floor inside, just plywood thrown down. I work for a major cable service provider as a field technician. We've also had our vehicles searched by police right after a visit to a customer's house. Come to find out the police were about to bust in on warrant arrests, but we showed up and interrupted it. They searched our vehicles to make sure we were not helping them get away. And then there's the Setch toys, just out and about, not a care in the world. I get it, it's their house. Or firearms just openly sitting around loaded. Those people get mad that we won't touch them and ask them to move them somewhere else. The worst ones are the ones with kids or animals that are very clearly hazardous living conditions for the kids or animals. Doing this kind of customer service job has really made me question whether or not humanity even deserves to go on. Bring on the next extinction event. I'm a retired detective and current computer forensic examiner. I still go on search warrants, usually for internet child sexual exploitation crimes. Sorry, I'm not answering any questions about any particulars about my job. I have seen some shit. When we get a house that's reasonably clean and orderly, it's a real relief. Often these kids of dudes live in filth and chaos. Even as a regular street patrol officer, I never saw this kind of hoarding, lack of cleaning, or basic maintenance of homes. I've seen bathrooms that were half caved in from water damage, electrical panels that were jerry-rigged and caused us to call the city to condemn the residents as a fire hazard, rotting bags of trash with maggots, pee jars/jugs in piles, numerous weird Setch toys, some made to look like a child, printed photos of kids with splatter on them. Hoarding is really common. Beds with clothing piled on top, spilling all over the floor, mixed with trash and old food containers. Sometimes we can't figure out where these people sleep. Often the other residents are living the same way, but sometimes we will see a family where only one of the kids are trying to keep it less gross. One time, a guy had a bucket next to his desk with sheet in it. He said he dumps in the toilet, which was basically stained black from never being cleaned. He had a bucket next to his desk to sheet in. An open bucket of sheet. Not all homes of pedophiles are like this. Sometimes we actually get very normal appearing suspects. Usually it's a moderately disheveled bedroom or computer room, but the common parts of the house are reasonably normal. I'm pretty convinced there is a strong correlation between this sexual deviancy and other serious mental illness. As a chimney sweep in Germany, I have seen some crazy shit. One guy definitely takes the cake though. So I'm on my normal work routine in a district that is new to me and where I don't know the clients yet. I have to go into every apartment in a standard apartment complex to check the gas heater. I knock on one of the doors, and as soon as it opens I literally jump back. Standing opposite of me is the most zombie looking motherfucker I have ever seen. Completely grey leathery skin, sunken bloodshot eyes, dressed in a very old green parka and just terrifying to look at, even as a horror movie fan. Nonetheless, I got a job to do, and so I proceed to enter the zombie lair. Here is where shit gets really crazy. Pictures of the Queen cover every square inch of this dude's apartment. Blows my mind to this day just thinking about it. Completely surreal. Literally everywhere are pictures and memorabilia of the British Queen, in a zombie's apartment in the middle of Germany. I make my way to the bathroom with the back against the wall, while this creep is following me, and just silently staring me down with his damn red eyes. I just want to get my job done as quickly as I can and throw a sap. All of a sudden, the guy starts to speak to me. Well, not really speak as much as mumble and ramble incoherent stuff. From what I can gather from his ramblings, this crazy mofo is absolutely convinced that he is the queen's illegitimate son. That seals the deal for me. This guy's batshit crazy, and I have to get out. I half-ass my job super quickly, while planning an escape route in my head in case shit goes sideways. The zombie is getting irate about me ignoring his ramblings and starts getting louder, not quite screaming at me but getting there. I say fuck it, grab my things and push past him, and bolt out of the door. After my shift I told the story to my boss, and he was like oops, lol, should have warned you about that one, sorry. Turns out he had tried to poison my boss twice, offering him bottles of champagne with a clear drill hole in the cork. My boss had the second bottle analyzed, and it turns out there was rat poison in there. He also tried to stab another chimney sweep a few years before. Apparently, he is also barred from entering England, because he allegedly tried to climb the fence to the Buckingham Palace, while shouting for his mom to come out and accept him as her son. Can't confirm that story though, it's just what I've been told. TLDR, zombie is obsessed with the queen, and has tried to poison chimney sweeps. As a social worker I went into some truly awful homes. One was the home of 3 adults, 2 parents and an adult son, all of whom were lower functioning and everything was covered in dog urine and pup. The floors were squishy and weak when you walked on them, and there were piles of pup all over the couch and chair. It was hard to breathe. They had 6 chihuahuas that never went outside and no one ever picked up after them. I had a house that had roaches everywhere. Literally everywhere. And when the moms started cooking they would come out of the cabinets and make lines on the cabinet doors towards the food. Some of them would fall in the food and the mom made her kids eat it because they're not going to be wasteful. I had an older client who lived in the woods with his wife and adult sons. The directions to the home was, stop at the tree that was struck by lightning and walk into the woods until you see the creek. Turn left and follow the creek until you find us. The first time I got to the little clearing the adult sons were in a fist fight. My client told me that they were fighting over which one has sex with mom that night. He spit towards them and said he never gets a turn anymore. I had an older female client that had just had a complete break from reality. We were talking one day and a roach crawled across her cheek. She never even reacted, and it just stayed on her face for 20 minutes. I walked into a home where my client of 2 years who I always got along with great had a chair in the middle of the room waiting for me. I sat in it, and he told me I'm not very observant. He lifted his arm and had a machete attached to it. He spent 45 minutes running the tip up and down my spine telling me all the ways he was going to kill me. I escaped. He went to the psychiatric hospital. He hadn't taken his meds for a few weeks and his schizophrenia had taken over. A client had a monkey that wore diapers, and it threw pup at me. I sat on one client's couch and she started screaming at me because I sat on him, the guy only she could see. I walked into a home, and my client had cut her leg so bad I could see the bone. Got her to the hospital. Went to a man's home, and noticed that something seemed off. Did my visit, left. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Got halfway home, and turned around and went back. He started crying. He had just taken an overdose of all of his medicines. What I'd picked up on without realizing it was that his pill bottles were lined up in front of him on the table. He lived. I've seen so many wild things. I could write a book. Life is not what we see on TV. Edit. Typo. I have an uncle who used to be a normal guy, and he still is in many ways. When I was a little kid I remember him being incredibly handsome, and he worked as a welder making good money. After my grandmother was murdered, he started drinking a lot, and moved from smoking weed every now and then to using harder drugs. He also stopped working regularly, and spent most of his time fishing and hunting and being outdoors, which was always his hobby, but wasn't all consuming. He moved into my grandparents' house, the house he grew up in, after my grandfather died a few years after my grandmother. It got to the point where he was missing utility payments, so he would sometimes go a month or 2 without water and electricity. He stopped maintaining the house at all, and eventually all of the broken windows were covered in sheet plastic. The floor was sagging in many places. The house was built in the late 1800s, but my grandparents had always kept it maintained and clean. Eventually the cement porch caved in, and he just put a few bricks on the ground, so you gotta walk up the steps, step down into the ground beneath the porch, and then climb up into the front door. He eventually stopped closing the front door so his animals would wander into the house as they pleased. I once went to visit, and there was an engine from a late 80s model Chevy Suburban being rebuilt on the coffee table, completely with oil and grease everywhere, and chickens freely roaming the house. He had a wife and 4 kids in this house as well. All of his kids are genius level intellect. His oldest, the only one out of school, was invited to technical schools in Japan, Madrid, Atlanta, and somewhere else in Europe, I forget. He also designed an irrigation system while in middle school. I think growing up without toys, or without the distraction of TV made them focus on school more. Though my uncle is also insanely smart, and probably the funniest and most quick-witted person I've ever known. I wish he'd have found a way to realize his full potential. Hopefully his kids will. TLDR, my super Christian neighbor has a room full of kinky sex toys. Not my job or my house, but talked to the repair guy who left my neighbor's house looking a little shell-shocked. Okay, so what you need to know about my neighbor is that she's a crotchety, old, holier than thou Christian bitch. Example, I have been best friends with the boy in the house across from me since I was a baby, and one day, when I was 10 I was leaving his house, I hugged him goodbye, and then went home. She stopped me before I could get to my porch, and said, you know, if boys see you whoring around like that you won't get a good husband, and I don't want to live next door to a slut, so keep your legs closed. I was 10. Anyway, I was 15 when this story happened. I was gardening and doing outside chores when a plumber came to her house. He was there for 20 something minutes before he left looking like he'd seen a ghost. I asked him if he was okay and what happened. I'd seen the interior of her house before, and it was much like her, bland, outdated, and overly Christian, like there were crosses and pictures of Jesus everywhere. He told me that he'd gone to her basement to check on something with her water heater. She tried to stop him saying it was messy and she didn't realize he'd need to access that room, but he went in and was met with a room absolutely filled with sex toys. Some were really weird apparently. He didn't elaborate on that, and to make everything worse, several were quite obviously recently used, and suddenly her being around him in nothing but a bathrobe and slippers was very uncomfortable. He fixed the issue and got out. When he finished telling me he actually looked at me and realized I wasn't an adult and cringed. He asked me not to tell anyone that I told him all that, and I said, dude, I'm going to do everything in my power to forget what you just told me. That failed unfortunately. I never looked at her the same way again, and was so glad when we moved 4 months later. I delivered pizza for 4 years. This is my weirdest story. I delivered pizza to an old guy, 70-ish, in a tiny standalone apartment. No shade, but my first impression was poor and feeble. The front door was a blanket, not like covering the open doorway. The literal front door in the middle of the city. I hear an old man's voice calling to me to step inside. The implication of needing me to come to him is crystal clear. His living room had a low, glass table, a push mower, a small flat screen TV on an even smaller stand, and one dim yellow lamp next to a bed where he lay. The table was covered in nearly a dozen medicine bottles. The lawnmower is a little weird, but just major old and alone vibes, right? Until he pays me, male, 26 at the time, and does the creepy hand touch and linger bit and goes, can I ask you a favor? I'm just trying to deliver pizza, but I figure, hey, maybe I can give up a small amount of my time and make a feeble old person's day better and be back before the manager notices. Maybe the touchy thing was just being old and weird. Maybe I'm making too much of it. Me, tell ya what, tell me what it is and I'll decide. Customer, go to the gas station down by the main road, that's pretty close. Probably, and pick me up a couple 40s of Miller Lite. What? I'm not buying alcohol on the clock. I'm gonna politely decline and excuse myself, and bring them back here. Not happening. Then, when you get off of work, what? You can come back here and enjoy one with me. All of the alarm bells now. I notice the razor blade, white powder, Bill Crusher, and rolled Bill on the table next to him in the place most convenient to where he was sitting. Me, we're actually timed on our deliveries down to the minute. I'm really sorry, but I should head back to the store as soon as possible. Well, I'm uncomfortable. He tries a little back and forth. Please, will you? Can you do it this way? Pushy thing, but I brush him off and head back to the store with a story that I know will have to wait for close. That was about 12 years ago and it still weirds me out. I work as an internet installation technician. Fancy name for going to people's houses and running wires into the house and setting up a router. Anyways, there was one house that had the siding wilting off and showing rotting wood. I walked up to the front door and saw a flat screen TV. It looked brand new. I tapped it and out crawled, I would say, almost 30 cockroaches. Nice, the bugs fried it. I can't wait to see what the inside was like. I knocked, waited about 3 minutes and they opened the door fully. The smell. Imagine being punched by Mike Tyson with the worst smell imaginable. And no, I don't mean the worst smell imaginable, this was worse, it actually made me gag. And I worked with my father in pig farming as a kid, so I was used to crappy smells. But this, dear God, it was awful. But what I saw was worse. Black mold on the walls, ceiling and a black carpet. Looking at the corner, it used to be tan. Roaches crawling everywhere, the ceiling caving in from what I could guess was water damage. And 2 people easily pushing 500 pounds in weight sitting on a pull-out couch that smelled as if they hadn't showed in over a year. I never had to go inside as they said they unsubscribed from our service. Thank the good Lord. One of my friends who did have to go in there described it as hell. Actual hell. Like living in sewage. He told me he put earplugs in his nose and chewed 3 sticks of gum to breathe in the mint smell to make it bearable. I have plenty more stories as Nebraska has sheet towns, we call them, and they are full of trashy, crackhead, junk homes. If you're interested, just comment and I'll tell. About 16 years ago, as a poor college grad, my girlfriend at the time was looking through Craigslist postings for quick work we could do to make a few extra bucks. There was a posting that stood out to us. It was $1,000 cash for 1 day of work. The posting was very terse and didn't have much info. Just a number to call, the pay, and an instruction that this particular job was cleaning an apartment and it had to be cleaned completely today. We thought, well, this sounds like an easy grand. We've cleaned up our mess of an apartment before. Why not? So we got the job. The Craigslist poster wasn't at the apartment when we arrived. There was just a note on the door indicating where the trash bags and cleaning supplies were. The key was under the mat. We opened the door. The front door opened into the side of the kitchen. The instant we opened the door, the sound caused approximately 1.2 million flies to go airborne off what I can describe as a gelatinous pile of decomposing half-finished big gulps and fast food. That set the tone. The cabinets were full of rotting food, so rotten it had leaked out, and mold held cabinets shut. The sink was backed up. Garbage was everywhere, pressed into the floor, and stacked about 3 feet below the ceiling in most places. The piles of garbage were a fascinating stratification or fossil record of the last decade or so. There were newspapers at the bottom mourning the death of Princess Diana. This person had a lot of trash and was clearly an insane hoarder. We chipped away slowly, filling bag after bag of just about everything we picked up. The bags were to be piled into the living room before we left. The pile grew quickly. Probably the worst part was the bathroom, which was so wretched we had to wear masks to even enter the room. The door was held open by garbage. Around the toilet, the entire area around the back of the toilet and the sides was packed with a combo of used tampons and other feminine waste. We had to use a small shovel to break it apart, to throw it away in bags. The smell was absolutely incredible. We had no idea what we were signed up for. In the tub, it had a thick coating of some yellow goo which, I think, has yet to be reproduced in the lab. The tub looked like it was filled with water and some sort of dead creatures like 20 years ago with a tampon clogged drain, and it was allowed to slowly drain over years while everything inside decomposed. Imagine something like that evaporating and what's left. The saddest part was there was a kid's room. There was a bunk bed and the top bunk was only accessible by climbing up on the garbage. That part really broke my heart because it was clearly a very young kid and they probably knew what was going on and that it was bad. We dug our way through everything, bagged it all up, and called it a day. Fuck that job, and it was not worth $1,000. Not even for a poor college student. Did the equivalent of Geek Squad for a couple years. Went to a house to install a printer. Older lady, probably in her 70s, lets me to her bedroom, where her laptop and printer are. The queen-sized bed is completely covered in papers, bills or invoices it appeared. Had to be 75 to 100 papers there covering the entire bed. My sense of smell is pretty poor from a previous concussion, but I kept get a whiff of something really bad. Her laptop is so incredibly slow it's taking forever for me to get this printer setup even started. Trying to figure out what I can do to make this PC run a little faster, I realize Word is open. And not just a single document. When I mouse over it, it gives me a scroll bar of documents that are open. 82 documents she has open on this Toshiba laptop with 8 GB of RAM. Plus other stuff. No wonder this thing was running like garbage. She disappeared. I can't find her anywhere to see if she can save some of this stuff and close it. Suddenly I hear her yelling on the phone. Apparently her daughter's maid of honor was telling her off. Now she's crying. I decided to just stay with this terrible computer for now. Hell if I'm getting anywhere near that. Setup finally finishes, and now I have to find her to reboot this thing. I walk out, and get husband is laying on the couch in nothing but a robe. He's surprised to see me, but make no movement. Lucky I'm in a position where I can't see anything, cause he clearly didn't care. She comes up, and saves her stuff and reboots the laptop. I need her to log back in after, so she hangs around. She goes, "What's this?" Under a pile of papers on the dresser is a big glass bowl covered in aluminum foil. She lifts the aluminum foil and a bowels of Satan's hole came out and flooded the room. She just calmly goes, "EWW old potato salad," and takes it away. It had to be there for weeks. It was so horrible. I finish and she asks if I can look at her husband's printer really quick. He's having some issue. I don't want to go back to the store, so I say sure. She leads me upstairs. Hiding behind this giant bookshelf desk in the middle of the room is of course robed dude. He asks me some question about why he can't print a video. He really is looking to print a paused image from a video. Stupidly I ask him how he's doing it, and it's born. He's trying to print out screenshots from his 40B Born collection. And that was the day that I was done with that job. I think I went to one other house after that. That job sucked. I've been going into people's houses for service calls for 15 years, so I've seen a lot, so it's hard to pick one. First off, I'd wager about 1 in 8 homes are completely hoarder level filthy. It's not an economic/race thing either. I've seen nasty rich people and nasty poor people of all ethnicities. The worst ones I can think of off the top. Went into a guy's house that was a dirty hoarder. His house was filled with jars full of human feces and urine. My guess is his water got turned off a lot, and his house was run down, and he had plumbing issues. Still nasty AF though. Next I went into a really old guy's house that was like 100. He had dementia. His house was infested with rats, like 100s of them, to the point the floor was covered. He acted like he couldn't see them. I actually called the health department to get him help. Next was a crazy cat lady that had cages lining all the walls of her entire house from floor to ceiling filled with cats. House smelled like ammonia so bad I told I couldn't work there. Went into a guy's apartment that had the worst roach infestation I've ever seen. I moved his couch to get to an electrical outlet and the entire back of his couch was covered with roaches. Like a complete wall of roaches. Millions of them. Made my skin crawl, and I still don't bring my work cloths into my house because of this. Finally, and this is the personal weirdest one for me, went into this guy's house. That was a really weird guy. Weird unshaven hungover looking guy wearing a bathrobe in the afternoon. Has all his windows boarded up. I actually thought was sent to a condemned house until he answered the door when I was on the porch calling it in. Has a bunch of rooms in his house with multiple locks and chains on the doors. I was there to fix wiring and some of the wiring ran under one of the bedroom doors into the room. I told him I needed to look in the room and started walking in the direction. Guy literally sprints, stands in front of the door with his back pressed on the door and arms outstretched yelling, "You can't go in here." Told him I need to look at the electrical meter in the backyard then. Guy has about 4 to 5 grave sized deep holes dug in his backyard. At this point I'm worried about this guy coming up behind me and hitting me with a shovel or something. Told the guy I had to get something from my truck and drove away. To this day I still think this guy was a serial killer. I work in EMS and prior to that I had experience working at a hazmat cleanup unit in the Coast Guard. Sounds odd, I know. I've seen my fair share of homes destroyed by natural disaster/human hoarding, but by far the worst thing I've ever seen was on a call for an unknown medical, common term for dispatches unable to determine what is wrong. It was my second year as an EMT, and we were on our way back from transporting a patient into the city when we got the call to go mutual aid into a fairly rich neighborhood that was outside our usual coverage area. This can happen when all of a town's resources are tied up. We pulled up to this really high-end condo/townhouse overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful on the outside. It gave no clue what we were about to walk into. I grabbed some equipment while my partner went inside to check on the situation. Since no one was there to meet us, it only took me a few minutes to grab the bags, and as I turned around my partner came running out of the condo looking green and shook up. He immediately called on the radio to get an advanced unit. They carry specialized equipment. We were a basic unit with limited options. I asked him what was wrong, and he couldn't even talk, just waved for me to follow him in. Behind the beautifully managed facade and impressive looking front door was a house absolutely full of garbage. I don't mean like hoarded things, I mean straight garbage. Food containers, tissues, trash bags full of even more stuff, unidentifiable disgusting collections of filth, and it was close to half a foot deep, cluttering the floor in every direction. I followed my partner climbing up on top as we made our way to the living room. There was a man on the stairs going on and on semi-incoherently about how he wasn't taking care of her anymore, and she was gonna die on that couch and that's fine, she deserves to. When we made it to the living room, is when I saw her. There were more than a few flies in the room, trash piled up all the way to the couch, and this woman, just sitting there. Shallow breaths, non-responsive, but eyes open staring at the wall. She was wearing normal sized clothes, but she appeared to be swimming in them. Her arms were stick thin and all around her the area of the couch she was sitting on was completely filthy and greasy looking. 3/4 of the couch looked almost brand new, but the cushion she was on looked sunken and partially collapsed. We tried to get vitals, but her arms were too small to get a pressure on with an adult cuff, and the pediatric one was in the truck. My partner went to get a scoop stretcher, think a litter that you can break into 2 pieces and slide under someone before it comes back together, and some straps so we could get her out. The old man on the steps started talking about aliens and the Chinese, and finally the fire department showed up. My partner came back with them and the scoop. We got her on and struggled our way out of the house with the crazy old man shouting incoherently upstairs. I have no idea what, as I could no longer hear clearly. As we get this woman outside, the advanced medic truck pulled up, so we loaded her right into them. We assisted getting this woman prepped. We used the trauma shear to remove the clothing, because honestly she had been on the same position in that couch for some time judging by the state of the couch cushions. After we lifted her off, and her clothes were filthy from urine and feces. Everything was hanging on her, like she was a child wearing her parents' clothes, except that it was the right length. The most horrifying part was when we cut off the yoga pants. Each leg was filled with feces which were crawling with maggots. The initial trauma exam showed no injuries, but this woman looked exactly like a WWII concentration camp survivor straight out of a documentary I recall watching. We were close enough to the city that the medics just decided to head for the hospital top speed. Me and my partner were no longer needed, so we got back in the truck and headed back to the base. It hit me when we were leaving, and I looked back at the place we were leaving. With the door closed, you would have no idea about the horror show we just walked into. It could have been anyone's neighbor. I mean, how often do you go into your neighbor's house? I've never really talked about this call, and it happened a few years ago now. It's odd how well I still remember it. Never did find out what happened to the patient. I don't think I really wanted to know at the time. Late to the party, but still. I used to work as a delivery guy long ago. Specifically, a delivery guy for a specific supermarket. One of the rules for delivery guys was that you can get in people's homes and arrange their order, like put stuff in the fridge, put the pasta on the shelf. If the client requests you to You don't expect weird shit from a supermarket, do you? Also, I just got out of the army. Some weeks pass, and this old Aish, about 65 to 70-year-old lady makes an order. It is important to describe her for this story. About 1/3 of white hairs, as in, she's old, not a dye job, on her head reasonable body, very high heel shoes, exposition, impressive legs and arms, she works out, kind of, weird, chest, like, she's not sagging to the floor, there's definitely some sagging, but I don't know, a bad boob job attempt, perhaps. She holds herself well, and has this, let's call it aura about her, like she's above us, mere mortals, and she knows it. But most notably, her order, to crates, 32 over 50 cartons. I don't remember if the crates were arranged in 4x4 or 5x5, of milk, 2 watermelons, the biggest we have, a bunch more heavy stuff, and normal, not heavy food. Now, I don't want to brag or anything, but I was, let's say slightly above average muscular for my age. Like, I wasn't going to the gym or anything, but regardless of who you are, the army, any army, after leaving, it'll leave you buffish. Not Dwayne Johnson, but you do get muscle. Even as a girl. Especially as a girl. That one weirds me out, tbh. Not everyone can be Jivati or Okez, you know, special ops. There are a lot more, let's say peaceful divisions than there are not. I was a paratrooper, and the entire parachute folding squad, and as I learned later, divisions. All of them, is girls. Tower watchers, girls. Radio squad, girls. Weapon cleaners, girls. Staff, in general, I might have seen one guy in there. Not sure if it's a guy or a girl with a buzz cut. Still, the girls come out buff as hell. They can be bouncers after the army. We, guys, get only slightly more buff. This lady asks for delivery by foot, as in, she walks home, I go with her, and when we get to her home, I unpack and go away. I'm naturally pissed off, because now I have to figure out how to deliver the watermelons. Watermelons around. Everything else fits the boxes well, but the watermelons don't. I go to the back to take not one, but two, watermelon boxes for the watermelons, and then argue with one of the owners about how, due to their size, I can't deliver them safely in a single box. It took him like 20 minutes to reach the same conclusion I did in seconds. In the meantime, the lady runs off. I may not be a bat, but I swear I heard these heels for like 100 meters away. I prepare mentally, ponder how I'm going to rest with these watermelons not bursting, while I take a minute or two off, because her house is at an incline, and later ponder how I'm going to not die holding the cart, because, as it turns out, her house has a few steps down. Point managed to not die on those stairs, knock on the door, apologize for being sweaty and disgusting. Australians, I think, will understand Israeli summer. And then managed to look at her. Holy shit. Point. While I was walking there, she changed clothes. Normally, changing clothes, even after going out for a little in Israel, is not unheard of. It's just that she changed to different clothes that are out of the norm for summer. Thigh boots, leather skirt, leather. I don't even know what it's called. Imagine a chimera between a really short, but comfortable dress and a corset. She also had these super long leather gloves, and a crop stick. Now, I get it. You're a retired dominatrix. You want to relive your old days. You want to order a guy around. You want to be all dominatrixy, while the guy wants the sweet release of death at this point. I don't blame you. I too wish I could relive my days as a paratrooper. Thing is, that's not the way to do this. The only reason I'm arranging stuff for you is because you're elderly, and both you, and I don't want you to unpack the 2 crates of milk or heave those faking watermelons. While I was unpacking her stuff, she was pointing at where she wants what with her crop stick, and saying stuff like, wow, you're sweaty. I didn't make you too tired, did I? And I hope I didn't bother you with my order with a wink, and stuff like that. Point. It was more weird than disgusting. Point. It was still disgusting, because she was like 3 to 4 times my age, though. For a change of pace, I'll mention a house I lived in briefly. We moved to this tiny little town when I was a kid, and when I say tiny I mean less than 600 people. The house we rented was an old farmhouse that was at least 100 years old, and not in great condition. It was weird as hell. Shortly after moving in we found a hidden room that was stacked to the ceiling with old antique furniture. Chairs, desks, tables, the works, but not the usual sort of house furniture, no couches or comfortable chairs, no beds, etc. The owner, who had only bought it a couple of years prior, had no idea about the hidden room, nor where the furniture had come from, but it was behind a thin paneled wall with no door, so we don't even know how they got the furniture in there in the first place, or why they would have paneled it up after the fact, if it was done that way. When the first water bill came it said we had used 40,000 gallons of water. We had seen no evidence of a leak anywhere in the house. We searched around the property even and found nothing. Finally Dad thought to check the cellar. It was a weird arrangement. It had the big angled doors, like you see on storm cellars and the like, but the entrance was inside the kitchen, and found it completely flooded. The water was about an inch below the floor level of the kitchen. We had never even been down there, so we had no clue what had been in there, or even why it had water pipes running through it. Dad called a company to come pump it out, so a plumber could get in to fix it, and found that there wasn't a single water pipe running through it. We had no idea where the water came from. Behind the house was another structure about as old as the house itself. It was like a long garage, but with windows all the way around and just one regular door on the side. It was pretty overgrown around the outside of it, but looking through the windows you could tell it was full of old commercial shelving with an ancient cash register on a counter at one end like someone had run a store out of it at some point. I should mention the house was far enough out in the countryside that the nearest neighbor was a mile and a half away, and the building was tucked in behind the house, so it couldn't be seen from the road. Not exactly the best location for a store. Finally, the big one, the drains and faucets everywhere in the house were electrified. We kept getting shocked from them now and then, and finally Dad called the power company out. Over the course of 3 months they brought out techs, then engineers, then senior engineers, and no one could figure out why. They checked and then replaced all of the external wiring. They drove something like 30 ground rods in, they pulled the meter, and ultimately pulled every meter in a 10-mile radius. Still every drain and faucet in the house was electrified. In the process they also noticed that other things on the property were electrified too that definitely were not hooked up to wires, like the, thankfully empty, 500-gallon propane tank next to the house. After months of dealing with this, and being no closer to even finding out what was going on, much less fixing it, we finally gave up and moved. Oh boy. Are you ready? You're not. I did plumbing for a while, and the most memorable service call was a clogged sink in a shitty little apartment complex. I show up, and the maintenance guy asks if I want him with me, which was odd, since we were fairly used to each other at this point, to visit the unit. I'll let him know I'm good and proceed to meet with the tenant. Old, junky white guy answers the door entirely naked. Weird, but not the weirdest thing I've seen by far. I do my normal "hey, you have an issue" spiel and move from the front door back into the adjoining bedroom and bathroom. There on the bed are 2 young black men, naked and collared. One has a ball gag in his mouth. Both are blushing hard. I just kinda froze and averted my eyes. Consensual? I ask. The gagged one just goes mmmmhmmm and nods emphatically. The other won't speak or meet my eyes. I just shook my head and got the job done before leaving. The maintenance guy just about died laughing when I told him about it after I cleared the line and left. Apparently that was not even a little unusual for this tenant. We are not done. I did crime scene cleanup for a while too. I have hoarding stories, infestations, violent crimes, drug use stories, you name it, to stick out as memorable. The first was in a very expensive area, $1 million plus homes. The person had passed away months before anyone realized they had expired. The smell of decay was obvious from the driveway about 100 foot from the entrance. Usually the body has been removed by the time we arrive, but this person had straight up liquefied in the time since their death. The bones had been removed, but the rest of the body, which had done as bodies do over time, was all over the entryway. Skin, an eyeball, hair, organs, yeah. There was also an immense amount of flies and rats enjoying the smorgasbord. Even fully sweeted and masked, the smell stuck in my nose for months. The second was not properly vetted by dispatch. The backquote customer refused to give a name, wanted to meet at a very unusual time, and wanted to pay cash, upfront. Needless to say, I refused the job. Another team did not, and they ended up on the news after being detained by law enforcement. There's still an NDA around the whole situation for those backquote involved, but I never signed one. That said, I'm not going into more detail because of it. It was a fairly large story in the area it happened, so details aren't really copacetic. My weirdest and most disturbing experience was as pizza delivery driver in a small town. On the outside, the house looked normal enough. It was a common residential neighborhood, but as I approached the front door I noticed a note that read, "Deliver as you servant in trance." Odd phrasing, but I walk along the sidewalk to a side door. Knock and sheet got crazy. I'm practically blinded as the door is opened, and super bright fluorescent lights shine out. I noticed I'm in a room with 3 washers and dryers. A black woman in a maid's outfit tells me to put on shoe covers and move around to the main house. An old woman comes downstairs and looks at me, and in a thick southern drawl she says she had to go get her pocketbook and to please wait in the foyer. I wasn't going back to where I entered, so I moved down the hall the other direction. First thing I noticed was an old man in a recliner. I tried to talk to him after we started at each other for too long, but then he started screaming. At first I asked if he was okay, but then it dawned on me that he likely had dementia, and I did my best to try and ignore him. I started to scan the room to avoid looking at this screaming stranger. First I scanned the bookshelf. I see all kinds of Nazi books. Then I notice an SS hat. That was it. I put the food down and made for the exit. I asked the maid to come outside with me and asked if she needed help, if she was some kind of slave of prisoner in the house. She assured me she was well taken care of. I shrugged and left, but when I got back to work I told my boss I would call for a police escort if I ever had to deliver to that house again. It wasn't me directly. Still the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I'm from Budapest, and I visit once a year for 2 weeks. I always book an apartment on Airbnb. This one wasn't in the best part of town, but also not the worst. Usual old houses with a yard in the middle. The apartment itself was fully renovated with air conditioning, fancy bathroom with whirlpool, etc. After 10 days I realized I've never seen anyone in the flat next to me, nor I've noticed any light in the flat. The windows were covered with heavy curtains. The only things I saw were pigeons and piles of birdshit, but only in front of that apartment. No one else seemed to be bothered about it, but I asked the other neighbors who were smoking outside speaking Hungarian what's up. They told me an old lady lives there, but they see her only twice a month when she gets groceries. She won't let anyone in and doesn't want help. 2 days later I got back from a night out, and the paramedics were in front of the apartment. They were all very pale, gagging and saying things like, "I can't do this, I need to vomit." The windows and the door were open, and that's when I saw and smelled a lot of things. The apartment was full of junk. Old newspapers, food, clothes, garbage bags, and the toilet had a huge pile of feces, almost up till the ceiling, and those apartments have very tall ceilings. But that wasn't the worst part. She apparently let the pigeons live inside. There were tiny pigeons and eggs all over the windowsill. The paramedics tried to figure out what to do with them. The lady had a medical emergency, and I left the next day, so I didn't know what happened after that. 2 weeks later there was an article about her on an online news site. It turns out she will return to the apartment, since there's no law in Hungary that says you can't live like this, and there are basically no psychiatric hospitals anymore, so they can recommend outpatient care, but the lady isn't required to go to the appointments. It's the most disgusting and horrifying thing I've seen to this day. I'm sure she's not the only one living like this. My experience isn't that funny, but when I gave private lessons to 14 to 18-year-old students, I often had to go to people's houses, and it gave me a deep insight into the reasons of kids' bad grades. A family was wealthy. They lived in a fancy villa with a huge garden, expensive cars, and 3 small dogs. The house looked like an interior design magazine. Everything was perfect. Except that the huge living room was only for display. The leather couches had plastic wrap. Even the bookshelf was almost empty and only to display some fancy gadgets. There wasn't a place to sit and study in the whole house. We had to stay around a kitchen table. And by we, I mean me, my student, her brother, their mom and aunt who sat for a coffee and chatted or watched television while we tried to study. After the second lesson I addresses the problem to the mom, explaining that you can't really focus on homework in a room full of people. My student didn't have a desk in her bedroom, so we couldn't study there, so I suggested her to move with her sister to the living room. I was fired on the spot and insulted for wanting to dictate law in their house, me the peasant in their fancy house. Next week she phoned me and asked me why I wasn't there. I told her because she fired me. She told me I wasn't a serious person and fired me again. I was working as an independent contractor for a big box store. I was hired to install a dishwasher. The address was very rural. He lived off a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere surrounded by woods. His driveway was at least 1/4 mile long and weaved through dense woods. Kind of spooky. I knock. The man opens the door. He has tattoos all over his face, horns implanted into his forehead, and a forked tongue. The first words out of his mouth were, "I must tell you something before you can enter." There is absolutely no talking allowed at any time. While inside, as he opened the door wider, I could see his entire living room was decorated with severed plastic baby doll heads, most of which were painted to look bloody or evil. Just the heads, lining a whole wall, held up with staples or nails. Also a giant flag of a pentagram, a goat's head with black eyes. I've been in thousands of houses and this is still the only time I was ever legit nervous. I go inside, check out his plumbing situation, and after taking some measurements I realized I wasn't going to be able to install his new dishwasher. I looked at him and was trying to make up sign language to explain to him why I couldn't do the job. Lol, like permission to speak, my dark lord. He got mad as fuck. I got to leave, and well, I'm just happy I'm still here to talk about it. I was looking for a house to buy and went to see one, a big old stone house, supposed to be 4 bedrooms. This is in the French countryside. It's pretty falling apart from the outside, and there are horses everywhere, in the garage, under lean toss, in the shed. Most of them in pretty rough shape, like on the order of 20 horses in what you'd think of as the front yard. We go in through the kitchen door, and we're in a fairly recently remodeled, kinda industrial looking kitchen. Everything's bright white tile or stainless steel, nothing homey about it. There are photos all over the walls of the owner and his wife and their horses, receiving lots of trophies at horse shows, but all from the 1990s, and nothing much else, other than a coffee pot. He takes us upstairs, and shows us one small bedroom, and a half bath. And it turned out that was it. The entire rest of the house had been gutted, back walls knocked out, open to the outside. There were another dozen or more horses in the rest of the house. Turns out his wife had died 15 years ago or so, and he'd just holed up and kept hoarding more and more horses. What it didn't say in the real estate listing, because he thought it went without saying, was that he only wanted to sell the kitchen and the stairwell and the bedroom, and a path from the road up to the kitchen door, because the horses needed the rest of the space, and they weren't going anywhere. He was vague about where he expected to live after that, but he needed to sell to pay for feed and vet bills. Whilst I had a job like this, the thing that surprised and shocked me most wasn't work related. My wife's best friend, who I also knew for a few years before I met my wife, had some issues with mental health and didn't have a huge support network. We were close with her, we all spent a lot of time around each other's places, etc. Her son, whose dad wasn't in the picture, suddenly came down really ill and had to go to a specialist children's hospital far from home. We looked after her other boy for 2 weeks, as well as did various bits to help out at her request / with permission, etc. Such as laundry, tidying her flat, etc. Mostly my wife, as I was working most of the time. She asked that we got her laptop out of the flat and gave it to her dad as he passed through on the way to visit. My wife, unfortunately, came down unwell, so I took a day off work to help with the kids and some of the errands / tasks, etc. I was told she normally kept the laptop in her room, either on the cabinet or under the bed. It wasn't on the cabinet, so I looked under the bed and pulled out a small case, which was the only thing there I'd expect to find the laptop in. However, it wasn't a laptop in the case. It was a series of such toys, which isn't the weird part. The weird part was that there were also lots of photo printouts from either my or my wife's social media, or from trips we'd done together. It instantly became clear that her attachment to me, and possibly my wife too, although judging from the way some of the pictures had been less likely, was more than just friendly. She'd had a particularly tough time, so I never said anything about it. I put it all back, and pretended like I'd never seen it, hence using a throwaway for this. I'm a health worker who goes in and assesses people's level of function for their legal claim after a car accident or medical negligence. I once attended this woman's home, which was probably the most disgusting dwelling I've ever been in. Upon arrival there were 10 to 15 full garbage bags leaking some odd colored fluid blocking the entrance to the front door, so I had to go around to the back door. The back door was broken off its hinges and almost fell off when I pushed it. Once inside it was clear that this was a hoarded house and not one of the clean ones mentioned earlier in this thread. There was used diapers, rotting food, spilled petrol and just general mess throughout the entirety of the house. The fridge was leaking and there was decomposing food on the stove and bench tops. It wasn't until I got further into the house though that I realized the true horror. Cockroaches, and thousands of them. They were crawling over the floors/walls, as well as me, whilst I was trying to complete my assessment of this lady, which, regrettably, took nearly 3 hours. The lady then took me on a tour of her home, and showed me where her 4 children slept. Their bedroom consisted of 2 bunk beds which had thin vinyl mattresses virtually empty of all their original stuffing. There were cockroaches climbing all over the bed/sheets and visibly living in the mattresses these children were sleeping on. Meanwhile, the mother's room had a brand new bed, still disgusting and covered in excrement, and a 60-inch flat screen TV. It truly made me appreciate what some kids have to deal with in life just to get by, as well as how unimaginably terrible some parents are. I'm an exterminator just out of training, and recently took a call to this one lady's house who was afraid squirrels were getting stuck in her attic and dying because she knows there's a hole somewhere in the roof she never bothered to have fixed, and she's gotten tired of this death smell in her house. So I went to go check it out. She was fairly polite, if maybe a little skittish. She looked about mid-70s. Typical old lady house, newspapers, chicken noodle soup, books for the soul, blocky TV with static that reaches all the way to the couch. Anyways, I make my way upstairs and see virtually nothing other than a stand and what seemed like some doorways. I pulled out my phone and got the flashlight on to find the pull string and get to it. I spent the next hour and a half doing my best to look around. Nothing, just some boxes, a cold draft coming through, and a little bit of light coming from the small hole on the left of the roof. I go back down and tell her everything should be fine. While I really wouldn't say what I smelt was pleasant, it certainly didn't strike me as death. Maybe just musty, and I told her so, and that it might just be time to replace her air filter and maybe buy some candles. She thanks me for trying, but still doesn't really buy that there aren't squirrels dying up there. As she cuts me a check, she also hands me a piece of paper. It was this shaky-handed, but well-detailed sketch of me looking around in the rafts earlier. I asked her what is this, and she just told me my son drew it. Somewhere in this dark place, her more than likely middle-aged son was watching me in the dark somewhere, quietly stalked me. I didn't really know how to take it, and just swiftly left. I've gotten calls from her to come back, but I just always leave it to ring now. One of the things I feel so good about leaving pest control was being in other people's living space. There was just a weird vibe when I would go into some homes. I don't know how to explain it. Weird people's space give weird vibes. So this one time, I get assigned some regular clients of another PCO who is on vacation. I've never been to this house, which is somewhat isolated in a old quiet neighborhood. The key was where I was told, so I let myself into the house through the garage as instructed. Upon entering the garage and heading to the door leading into the house via the kitchen, I see blood everywhere. On the door, walls, and huge puddles on the floor. No car in the garage. The door was mostly open, so I call out. Here's the weird part, and I till this day I cannot understand my actions. No answer after a few calls, so I proceed to continue into the house. There is blood everywhere, floor, walls, countertop, and the sink has towels just soaked with blood. As I continue into the house, following the blood river into a back bedroom, the hallway has bloody smears all over the walls and floor. I see that the headboard, bed, pillows, and blankets all have heavy amounts of blood on them. I check out the rest of this 3-bedroom house and see no signs of anyone. Seriously, I don't know what I was thinking, or not thinking. I leave through the front door, making sure to lock it on the way out, then proceed to treat the exterior of the house. Not once did I think to call anyone. This was the early 90s, so I only had a pager. I call my office from a payphone 10 minutes away to let them know I was finished for the day. Then I drive the 40 minutes or so back to our office. When I get back to the office, and as I'm talking to the office ladies, I tell them what I saw. Like I said, I don't know where my brain was at, because this is so not me. They then, in disbelief of the scene I recounted, start calling the home owner's business and associates, but get no response. We found out the next day that the guy had a massive hemorrhage and managed to get himself to the nearest firehouse and recovered in the hospital. I never went back or met the guy. As odd a situation as that was, my actions are the weirdest, I feel, and one I can never comprehend. I spent a few years working in a crematory for pets, dogs, cats, birds, etc. while studying to obtain my mortician's license. We would often perform removal services. Essentially, this means picking up the deceased pet from the owner's home and transporting it to the crematory for memorial services. It was fairly common for people to keep a few years worth of dead cats, small breed dogs, or other small pets in what is essentially a hunting freezer. Therefore, I would often remove multiple bodies from a pet owner's home at one time, usually to be cremated together. There was this one woman, however, who would call about once a year for removal services, and even though removal services were not part of my standard duties, being an office worker and whatnot, I was always the one that went out to pick up her pets, as every other employee just refused to do so. Do you want to know why everybody else refused to go there? Because this woman had, at any given time, in her small, 2-bedroom apartment, anywhere from 40 to 50 live cats at all times in her home. In her basement, however, she kept the dead bodies of the cats that had passed away, and she had no freezer. I'm going to repeat that. She had no freezer. Anyone know what happens to a dead body if it's not frozen? The smells, bacteria, and fluids that build up over just a few short days are worse than anything you could imagine. I would arrive to empty her cat can, as I called it, and it would be filled with maggots, rodents, and just about anything else willing to feed on the decomposing bodies of her poor cats. So once a year, I would go to this woman's house, remove any random number of dead cat bodies from her basement that she kept in a garbage bin, cremate them, and bring the ashes back to her house the following year. The smell was so putrid that I would not only drive the whole way back to the crematory with all the windows down, but I had to keep about 50 newly opened air fresheners throughout the vehicle during these trips, and wore a face mask that I placed scented oils inside of just to try and mask the smell. Called Animal Protective Services on her a few times, but unfortunately they never really did anything about it. Boss made us go back every year because she brought us a decent amount of business. Paramedic. Went to a home in the country. Neighbor stopped in to check on his elderly neighbor, as he hadn't seen or heard from him in a day or two. As in, hadn't seen his truck on the road into town for old farmer coffee meetings, etc. Neighbor found the patient, obviously unwell, called us, met us in the yard. The yard had 3 houses on it. The older 2 belonged to the patient's parents and grandparents, and the yard was littered with dead and decaying vehicles, farm implements, outbuildings, etc. points spanning about 3 generations. The kindly neighbor tried to warn us that the part was known locally to be an odd duck and to be prepared for some interesting decorations. He said something to the effect of, "I don't judge, to each their own, but if you don't need me, I won't be going back in there. It makes me uncomfortable." I told him all would be fine, thank you very much. The house was tiny, but there wasn't a single square inch of wall space that wasn't covered with posters of Justin Timberlake, gay cowboys, or the male model ads with bare chests and 6-packs. Since the invention of color photography and male modeling, and some more Justin Timberlake. Like, a disturbing amount of JT. All from when he first launched solo. Yep, really young looking JT. I don't recall if there was a single full nude image anywhere, but there was a lot of Justin Timberlake. Did I mention JT? We found the patient in the back bedroom, and he was very unwell. It had been ongoing for a while, and he'd been too sick and weak to clean himself or do laundry for a couple of weeks. He was buck naked, spread-eagled on a soiled mattress. There was a couple of 5-gallon pails of fetid urine and fesses by the bed. He had the forethought to place them there early on in his illness, so he wouldn't have to soil himself trying to get to the bathroom in his weakened state. Here comes the weird part. There was a key rack / small shelf on the wall, with about a dozen hooks. Each hook had a unique keychain. Each keychain was a name, different designs and styles, but all names. Each keychain appeared to have a car key, a residence key, and 1 or 2 assorted random keys like we all have. The first hook was in a name, like Anna. Then B, C, D, like I said, about a dozen hooks. I didn't have time to look at them all, but they were all different makes of keys. Chev, Toyota, and Ford. There were not sufficient numbers or variations of vehicles in the yard to account for all the keys. I wish I remembered the directions to the farm, because there's a part of me, a very large part, that would be willing to go back. He'll be long dead now, and snoop around. I have a terrible feeling there's a show box somewhere with the IDs of all the murdered people those keys belong to. This was a few years ago. I worked for a local construction company that did a lot of custom homes. We were working in a new subdivision on contract for a guy who purchased a double lot, so around a half acre, and the builder who was building the subdivision didn't do custom homes. He only offered his pre-planned homes. So this guy contacts the company, and within a few months we start to break ground on the house. It's a really nice subdivision. Minimum requirements for square footage, garage space, shed space, and I think even some colors weren't allowed. So kinda strict building requirements. So I get to look at the plans, and the house looks normal on the outside. A 4,000 square foot ranch style home, with walkout basement, or 3-car attached garage and a 1-car garage on the walkout basement. This is where it gets interesting. The interior of the home has a kitchen, 1.5 baths, 1 bedroom, and a small living area. In a 4,000 square foot house, that's odd. The main floor was to be concrete, supported by steel beams and plates in the basement. So the house gets built. It looks great on the outside. Inside is just a ton of open space on the first floor and the basement. The owner asks us to do the landscaping. We agreed. But it would have to wait at least a month, so the company had time to do other projects. When we came back, the inside of the house, the basement and first floor was packed with cars. At least 10 cars upstairs, and another 10 cars with 1 pickup truck in the basement. He had a small living space upstairs, and the rest of the house was just cars. The garage only had 1 car in it, because that is how he would drive in and out of the house. He had a 3-car attached garage. I'm not sure the city had any idea this was happening. Later we found out he submitted a different set of plans to the city, and the inspector who checked the house along the way never even looked at anything we did. He always approved it. So he might have been paid off. TLDR, guy had at least 20 cars inside of his house. All kinds of cars, old cars, 20 to 30-year-old cars, and even some newer cars. Camaro, Firebird, Mustang, Dodge, and even old GM truck. Nice collection. Just odd to store them inside your house. Real estate photographer here. So, I didn't see any of the weird sheet, because I think it had already been taken by a coroner. But the realtor I work with didn't give me any context until we were leaving the property, because there were cameras up everywhere. I just did my job as usual, but I found it so strange that all this nice stuff was just piled up everywhere. I even picked up a couple of cute mason jars wondering why the stuff didn't sell in an estate sale or something. She only made a ray sound in response. The realtor, a super Christian, this will make sense in a minute, normally stages the house nicely, and we usually work together to make the rooms look presentable for pictures. Not this time. She was just kicking sheet to the corners and she really didn't care about which angle I went with. It was so weird. So, we get outside, and she finally tells me the story. Apparently, the man who lived there was an abortion doctor. But, he didn't just do abortions, he kept the fetuses in his shed, in mason jars. His wife had no idea. Apparently he had something like 2,000 aborted fetuses hidden in his shed. She didn't know until she had already been hired. She tells me this as we are walking past the shed. My morbid atheist face lights up, and I said, oh my god, are they still in there? She stifles a nervous laugh and says no, that the coroner had already come months back. She told me we had to hurry and get the exteriors, because every time she came to the property, the neighbor came by to tell whoever it is that there were thousands of angel babies on the property and to not buy it. I told her I used to be a ghost hunter too, and I wondered out loud if we would see all the angel babies if I took shots of the shed. My humor about the whole thing had her giggling for one whole second, and she said, oh, I'm going to hell. I just laughed and said, yay. It wasn't a job, but more of a help your neighbor in a small town. I was maybe 16ish. There was an older couple down the road that were living on fixed income. I think they owned the property, but their old house was condemned and bulldozed. The county built a foundation and parked a mobile home over it. They had everything they needed in case of a tornado. We were reached out to because the couple had accumulated a handful of cars, and over the winter those cars were filled up with garbage bags. This was in a rural area, so we had a local garbage dump. They charged a penny per pound to get rid of your waste. Recyclables were free. The couple apparently couldn't swing the quarter per week. That's a gross overestimate. On Thanksgiving week, with all of our family in town and food waste, taking the easy way out with garbage. I digress. I got tasked with clearing out the garbage bags from the cars, so a guy with a tow truck could haul them to the scrapyard. He would give the money to the folks, and they'd be set for a little while. It would probably be about $1,000. Pretty decent windfall. So I walk up, introduce myself, and get to work, hauling bags to a portable dumpster trailer. It stinks like the undergarments of hell, but on any given day, I was shoveling gutters in a 90-degree barn, so at least I had a breeze. Then a bag caught on the door catch of one of the cars, and all turds broke loose. Many of the garbage bags were obvious kitchen waste and whatnot. A lot of them were very pillowy, but heavy. Turns out, those were the ones where they had taken to sheeting in the garbage can. Well, why were you sheeting in the garbage can? Because the basement was full. Full of what? Full of what? Full of what, Jim? Turns out, their septic froze over the winter, so they cut the plumbing line from the bathroom. Every time they flushed a turd, it plopped into the basement. This had gone on for months. Everything that used water had drained into the basement. Kitchen gloop, turds, shower water had clogged the sump and filled the basement. When it hit the brim, they started sheeting in the kitchen trash. I was monitored by the local hospital for any infection or communicable disease, just for being in the area. I got a clean bill of health, but I know that isn't true. I'll never be clean again. Ever. I'm the landlord and property manager. There was a house which needed ductwork to be added to the laundry room, which gets very cold in the winter time. The duct needed to go through a closet that was inside a bedroom. The bedroom was used by tenant's 15-year-old daughter. Her boyfriend was also in the room. As me and my wife were working, we caught something was odd about the teenagers. Then we noticed that they were getting an adrenaline rush out of covertly trying to masturbate each other and then proceed to have sideway dog style poking action while me and my wife are working in the room. Initially we thought they would just came in from the other room and sat on the bed to watch us work on the ductwork. In fact, they just wanted to be disrespectful by covertly masturbating while my wife is in the room and I was in the crawl space cutting holes for the duct. Next month I got a complaint from my security team who alerts us if there is motion events at unusual hours. The cameras on the outside of the house have caught these kids being nude in the backyard purposely in front of the security cameras. I told the parent, a single mom, about it. Instead of asking her children, she basically kept blaming us have pedophile thoughts. I showed her the footage. She couldn't fathom that her underage daughter is promiscuous and active and engaging in voyeurism. I gave them the eviction notice and evicted them next month. Respect is more important than money. and this could be a potential liability for me or my wife. Indecent exposure is against the law. I used to work for a satellite TV company, where I would install satellite TV service, included setting up the box inside the home. Two houses I will never be able to forget. House 1 was a trailer with a ton of trash and beat up cars outside. The trailer itself looked lopsided and didn't seem livable. I knew when I got there this was going to be a challenge, but chalked it up to some people just having a rough go at life. Inside was worse than I could imagine. Holes in the floor, dog shit and piss, and cigarette butts everywhere. I still installed the box in the living room carefully. Then I had to install another box and the cables going outside into a bedroom. In order to do what I needed, they either needed to move a bunk bed, or I had to lay on the bed to get to the wall. The bed was covered in piss stains and smelled like the worst piss ever. But here is the thing. In each room was an amazing TV. I know electronics, and the living room TV at the time was well over $2,000. I didn't get on that bed and simply said I had an emergency come up and needed to leave. I puked in the work van. House number 2 was the last one before I quit. It was New Year's Eve in Wisconsin, so it was very cold out. I was simply adding a box for another TV, and I thought easy, I'll be in and out. Problem was all of the cables came through one room of the house, and to split the connection for the second TV I needed to either get in that room, or split it, and do some rewiring outside, and go all the way around the other side of the house in -10-degree weather. The family for some reason would not let me go in that room. They seemed normal, but they just wouldn't let me, even after I explained that I don't care what's in the room, I'll just do my job and go. They wanted me to do the outside work, and at this point I was sick of working 6-day work weeks from 6 AM to 10 PM. I just gathered my stuff, said someone else will have to do the job and they are the reason I'm quitting. Went back to the office, took all my stuff out of the work van, and told my manager I'm done. He just looked at me and said I understand and wish you the best. Had a great New Year's Eve with my now wife that night. I did bank foreclosed homes back in '08-10. Newbie coworker and I arrived to a house that looks okay on the outside, but absolutely reeks like shit from the driveway. So, I bust out the drywaller's mask and the cheap peppermint spray. Getting inside was something of a chore. I had to pick the lock. Newbie dutifully heads off to start poking around and assessing material and tool needs as I start taking initial inspection photos. Then, in the first bedroom, I found it, a faking dead horse. Yes, an entire dead, decomposing and desiccated animal of the equine persuasion. Just then, I noticed motion in my periphery and immediately called out, "Do not open that door," just in time to hear the wet, dull thud of the wall-to-ceiling horse manure piling onto my poor coworker. Also, there, just past the posthumous Mr. Ed, was an honest-to-God nest for rats. This place had been abandoned for easily 2 months, and these fakers left that horse to starve to death and be eaten by vermin. Dead body. No, I'm not answering questions on this one. Suffice to say, this poor soul lost his marriage, kids, job, and eventually, will to live. I had actually bumped into him as he sat in the powerless house, contemplating the act. I made an effort to talk him down and left, since he was still occupying the house. I think it breaks my heart even more, knowing that he was a genuinely decent person, and was totally understanding about me moseying on into his living room, taking photos. Whoever you were, dude, I hope you found peace. Edit. A lot more of anyone really wants them. 3. The entire house was gone, so I dutifully photographed the foundation and basement. They hid the house somewhere else, and the bank was unable to ever locate it, to my knowledge. I've got a couple. About 20 years ago I picked up some side work to earn some extra $sign by putting up this guy's Christmas lights. He was referred to me by a friend, and I'm certain my friend knew what was up and didn't want to do it. I showed up at the customer's house, which was in a very fancy part of the city where I live, and his house was quaint, looked nice from the outside. He opens up the garage door to access an extension ladder and the smell, oh my god. The smell of ammonia. Turns out this was a crazy cat man. He had like 50 cats living in this little house and they literally did their business everywhere. I had to go up into the attic and there were black fly swarms because of all the crap. The stench was so strong I was literally dry heaving while I was talking to the guy. He definitely knew this was a gross job and paid me pretty well just to put up Christmas lights. Not gonna lie, I did it again the next year, but when he called the third year I said I can't. Poor dude was alone and loved cats. Feel bad for him in a way. Another one was I was working in an apartment building and we had to change out all the plugs and switches due to the aluminum wiring, and this lady had an entire apartment rented out across the halls from hers for her cats. There were only about 5 in this 2-bedroom apartment, but the only furniture she had were couches in the living room and bedroom. No beds, no dishes, just couches and a few litter boxes. We opened the door and much like the cat guy, the reek was horrendous and I did a refusal to work. Just looking in the door made my eyes water, and it lasted for hours. Same building, different suite, had to literally pry the stove from the wall of the kitchen because all the food on the top and sides and back glued it to the wall. Every cup and plate had a dirt ring around it and you could put it back exactly where you grabbed it from. I have a rad one though from working at this super expensive house. Extreme wealth. He was a collector of everything from sports to movies, and some examples were a games room with bats and sticks photos and famous ball and Babe Ruth's first page eek. I had to run up the van to grab a tool, and as soon as I hit the third step the Superman theme song came on, and right beside the stairs was a now illuminated phone booth with a mannequin and Superman's original costume from the show. He also had famous people's pistols on the wall going down the hall too. Guys like John DeLena and Billy the Kid. Could have spent a day looking around. Okay, this is my jam. I'm a fire safety systems technician / programmer. I have been going into condo suites, apartment suites, and townhouse units for buildings that have a monitored fire system and in-suite devices for annual testing since around 2009. Some notable things I've seen. Such the most notable incident was a couple who I suppose got off on being caught. We were doing the testing going from suite to suite. This unit was hardly the first one on the floor. They heard us make the announcements over the speakers. They heard the tones. We knocked, no answer. We knocked again. Waited, no answer. So the guard let me in. We both walked in, and I just got far enough to see around the corner into the bedroom, where a guy was giving it to someone. I couldn't make out who, but I turned on my heel and grabbed the guard by the arm to leave, but now he was curious, so he peeked inside and got an eyeful too. I thought it was funny, but the guard, who was younger, was weirdly quiet the rest of the day. Pretty girls who answer the door in a towel, and either they do the oops, silly me, just give me a second. YTF answer the door like that when you could just stay in the bathroom. The guard has the master key, so we don't need you answering the door. Or they show up scantily clad and act mad that we're there and kinda act like we're pervs. Again, no reason for you to even answer the door like that. And it's not like you didn't get weeks advance notice of the inspection. Hoarders. Just like the TV show. There isn't anything you can really do about them, and I feel empathy for them because it's a mental illness. Except when there's animals involved. That makes me mad. Live how you wanna live, but don't bring a poor animal into your life to have to lie in its own sheet. Christmas in July and August and September and faking all year. Some people live with their sheet decorated for Christmas all year round. It's a common enough thing for me to see it in at least 4 separate buildings we service. More oddities, a guy in a co-op building with hundreds of Barbie dolls all hung from the ceiling suspended in bondage poses with string point, young people living in an expensive condo who obviously spent all their money and have literally nothing left. The suite is devoid of furniture, and they're sleeping on deflated camping mattresses. Extremely lavish suites sitting in rundown old buildings. Going inside is like stepping into Narnia. I've got 2. I used to pick up and deliver household goods. I had to pick up a TV once from an elderly lady. Entered the place, looked around. There was not a spot greater than 5 centimeters apart that did not contain a cockroach. The smell burned my lungs, and I was gagging. Nevertheless, I was told by my boss I had to complete the job. I went to unplug the TV. Cockroaches had to be moved, so I could get to the plugs. They were even walking around between the LCD and the glass of the TV, in front of the picture. I asked for the remote, and the lady goes to hand it to me. but cockroaches are running to and fro on the remote up and down her arm. I had to ask her to remove them before handing it to me. I got outside and was gagging for 30 minutes after, and my throat was sore for days. For only 15 minutes in the apartment point I had to deliver a dryer and surround sound to a young lady with a 2-year-old kid. Could smell the place 15 meters away from the road. Entered the apartment and saw what looked like gravel everywhere. The 2-year-old had a nappy/diaper on that looked at least a day old. Burning, nausea-inducing smell again. Hoarder. Doesn't look like they can sit anywhere to watch a movie with the sound system. I look around and see an incredible ecosystem. On the floor and everywhere up to chest height there are cockroaches everywhere, one every 5 centimeters again. Then there is a sort of no man's land, a gap on the wall where no insects live, about 20 centimeter wide. Above this gap lives a spider infestation, just as numerous as the cockroaches below, and extends everywhere above my head. Needless to say I refused to stay and install anything, and noped out a sap. Felt sorry for the kid. I once took a pizza order to a house that the other drivers had noped upon seeing the address. It was any other college town ranch house. The front porch light was on, but nothing inside. Nothing unusual. I rang the doorbell. He answered, and I handed him a piping hot pizza from the bag. He had paid with a credit card over the phone, so he signed the receipt and smiled. As I turned to leave he said, "Oh, I forgot your tip." He flipped the inside lights on and went back into the house to get the tip, leaving the door wide open to the front room, where most residents might situate the typical sofa, coffee table, TV, or really any other furniture at all. There was instead a single, large, potted plant. The pot was about 18 inches high and at least as round. It was placed right in the center of the room, and the plant grew up to the 8 feet ceiling and out to the walls. The man returned, taking a wide path around the plant. "Okay, here's your tip," he said with a smile. "Hold out your hand," as if I was a 3-year-old at Halloween. I was 21, but whatever. With a dramatic swooping arm motion, he placed a tip into my open hand. A single silver dollar coin. I'm pretty sure I actually backed away while he stood in the door with a goofy grin, his huge plant sprawling behind him. Nope, 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 nope. Mostly just weird doll/props, Setch obviously, or Jason/Freddy, etc. Weird people not letting you into certain areas in the house for unexplained reasons. The obvious hoarders and people with too many family members in one house cheating in the basement. Weird pets, weird paintings, super religious people trying to convert you, webcam studios in people's basements. But weirdest for me was actually just 10 minutes from my house. After a contractor dug up their lawn to run fiber optics to the lady's house, she began having crazy headaches and could swear the house was moving. I assured her that the 2-3 inches of dirt they moved around with a shovel wouldn't cause any issue. She began going on about tectonic plates, spies, the signals their neighbor was blasting into their house. Understandably I didn't run away and went inside to see what was going on. I fix phone, internet and TV. Her phone was down. We go to the basement and it's a dark house. I don't really know why, but she's having headaches so maybe she had the lights off, whatever. Didn't think anything of it. People have done weirder things. We go downstairs and it's pitch black. She has an ancient flashlight and walks me down to where the phone lines meet up by the electrical panel and it's ripped right off the wall, wires exposed and everything. I ask her if she's having any work done, which she isn't, and she informs me that she had the hydro company come and turn her hydro off at the stack outside because she thought the frequencies were giving her headaches and she just ripped it out herself the day before. I look at her hands and they are bandaged, fighting poorly and bloody as hell. I ask her if she's okay and she says not to worry about it. I jimmy up a fix for the phones and start heading out. They don't need power to work, and she stops me and actually just starts losing her mind about how I was working with XXX, whatever name she said, and starts crying hard while pulling on her face really creepily. I tell her I'm just here for the phone and they're working. Her other issues are someone else's deal. Blah blah blah. Bunch of nonsense later, and she has me on the phone with this case manager for the contractor she thinks did something to the foundation of her house. He tells me she calls every 3 to 4 days and cries on the phone telling him to turn down the signals. He also mentions she's crazy, which I Gathered. Then she goes inside and just starts destroying her house. I give my manager at the time a call. He understandably says what the fuck and makes a note as she's screaming and destroying everything so other guys don't go there, and also to avoid being on the hook for the damages she's causing. I drove away pretty quick, maybe 5 houses, and someone comes out in a hurry and asks if I went into the house I was at. I say yeah, and he looks surprised. Tells me she's crazy and her brother or something looks after her, but hasn't been around for a longer than usual time. Man, he'd try and get a hold of him as soon as possible. She's usually up screaming every night in her house apparently. I hope she got the help she needed, because I wasn't sticking around to find out. I've seen a lot in almost a decade of telecommunications, but that was the weirdest one for me. Mainly the creepy paranormal activity, darkness, and this lady who wasn't all there leading me around a dark silent house was really unnerving. I used to be a computer tech for a little store in remote Australia. I once got called out to a sort of dilapidated little house owned by a rather strange family from New Zealand. All the windows in the house were completely covered, and when I walked into the living room, aside from the fact that the woman who answered the door and her 20-ish-year-old son looked strange, and there was a very unusual smell. There were 4 single beds set up around the TV, of which 2 were currently occupied by a middle-aged and an older guy eating and watching something on said TV. That was weird enough, but moving to the back of the place, I could see that the walls were all covered in blankets, and the places that weren't looked like they had been painted by a 4-year-old. I looked out into the backyard at one stage and could see that they had poured an enormous load of concrete, like 6x6 meters, onto undulating ground, then just walked all over it. It was literally covered in 10 inches deep footprints. The computer ended up being some ancient thing at the end of a long room that looked like a hoarder had been living in for a decade. I ended up saying that I needed something from the store and never went back. Then there was the cat lady, a woman in her 70s who had about a dozen cats in her house that were allowed to use the place for a toilet. She would leave every door and window closed and have the heating cranked to 11 all day long. The smell was so exquisitely bad, I lasted about 2 minutes and ended up sending one of the new guys out there the next day. He was not impressed. I don't know about weird, but definitely nasty. I was working as a sleep tech. So go to patient's home, attach all the leads and equipment for a sleep study to diagnose sleep apnea. Usually it'd be in the house for about an hour, connecting then explaining the equipment. I walked into one house and the smell of cigarette smoke hit me like a truck. I could barely breathe. The walls and ceiling were a brownish yellow and the carpet puffed with smoke on every step. The wife directed me into her husband's bedroom, and the smell became worse. It was now mixed with filth and stale beau. His bed sheets were stained almost black and a humanoid shape from where he usually laid. Every surface was coated with a layer of ash and numerous containers and trays filled with spent cigarette butts. The TV had a film of filth almost completely obscuring the screen. His hands were the same yellow-brown color as the roof. I couldn't work in that environment, so I requested we at least return to the dining table, which was again coated with a film of ash. I got him set up and got out of there in record time. The next day I developed a cough that turned into a 10-month battle with bronchitis. That's not even the worst part. When my boss went back to the house to collect the equipment, I told her how bad it was, so she stayed outside. The patient asked her to join them for a swingers event. Oh, and it took 2 weeks of washing to get the smell out of the medical grade equipment. At the time I worked in plumbing, but the owner also owned a auto router franchise. We'd all have to take turns to cover emergency weekend work and would sometimes have to actually go on site to fix an issue. This guy calls because his toilet isn't working and he has his daughters for the weekend. I get there and it's a trailer way out in the woods of an already sketchy area. Very rural Appalachian country. The place is a dump and has holes through the floor. Dude hands me like $300 cash up front and is going off on some crazy cracked out tangent and eventually circles back to how his sheeter isn't working. However, he also kept talking about his neighbor down the road and how they've been fighting every day going back and forth about money and weed. I'm trying to unclog this toilet for 30 minutes while he stands there talking non-stop about how he's going to shoot him the next time he comes on the property to beach, etc. The guy then says he has to leave to take his daughters back to their mom, but he pulls a handgun out from a kitchen drawer and hands it to me. He essentially tells me that anyone coming onto the property is looking for trouble and to protect myself lol. At this point I've already pulled the guy's toilet off, so it's just an exposed waistline. I also already called another worker to bring out more equipment to jet his sewer line. It's essentially pressure washing the inside of your pipes. I've already explained everything to my buddy as he gets there, and now we are outside about to unload equipment. It's now probably 1 AM and I've been there for 3 hours. We see lights at the wood line and heard people whispering. Then the lights shut off. We both looked at each other and immediately jumped in our vehicles and flew out of there like little girls lol. I threw the cash in the guy's mailbox at the end of the driveway and left him with no toilet lol. Next day the boss had to go back out there during the morning and reseat his toilet for him and let him know we are never doing business with him again lol. Back between 2008 to 2011 I worked for a DME company, durable medical equipment, out of the San Fernando Valley, California. I was an all-around employee, so I worked customer service verifying medical insurance with doctors or access for medical equipment, data entry and even made home deliveries that sometimes involved installing medical items in home, like a hospital bed, or services an oxygen concentrator. We rented medical equipment via insurance and had contracts with hospitals and smaller places to service patients that needed walkers, crutches, hospital beds, wheelchairs and oxygen either on a concentrator or O2 tanks. Being an all-around employee I would often see the medical records of patients when verifying insurance coverage for whatever equipment, then I would sometimes make those deliveries myself, especially on my way home from work to places close to where I lived. Well, one day I had to go to the house of a patient who had been receiving oxygen tanks from us for years before I even worked there, and he had a special type of stationary oxygen concentrator. I didn't know that all of the drivers hated making the stop for the yearly O2 concentrator servicing and opted to go not knowing what awaited. I get there, and right from exiting the car on the street you notice a smell. A foul smell like built up cat sheet, something rancid like a dead animal or rotted food. So I make my way up to the door knock and am greeted by short lady that was waiting for me and was very to the point, like okay get in, do what you got to do and get out. I also get confirmation that the smell is indeed coming from inside and is worse. I'm led into the living room and there is trash and filth everywhere on the floor, carpets that haven't been vacuumed in years, several empty cat boxes, but the smell of fresh cat sheet hidden somewhere. Think hoarders but less trash mountains. From there I'm led to the bedroom of the young man that's on O2 in his late 20s early 30s, and come to find out he's missing the entire bottom half of his body. He had a colostomy bag for bowel movements and was living in complete filth. At the time he was laying down facing a TV in the dark away from me, so we never made eye contact or said a word. His room is even dirtier than the living room and there was fast food wrappers everywhere. The floor was not visible, bugs and gnats everywhere, and the smell was originating from this room. The window looked like it was never opened, so it was humid to top it off. I pulled out the meter we used to check the pressure and levels to make sure it's running correctly, took down the data, replaced batteries and filters, and I kid you not, when I opened the hatch for the main filter about 15 roaches ran out, and I jumped like a MF. If it wasn't for me concentrating on getting it done as fast as humanly possible and getting the fuck out of there, I would have thrown up a few times. It was like nothing I had seen before. The whole family was living this way, but that guy was in the worst of it, and I'll never forget that experience. I was a super in an apartment building. Got a call from someone telling me that water leaked from the ceiling. This was in the middle of the night. I went to the apartment above the one with leaky ceiling to find the source of the leak. I rang the doorbell, but got no answer. Then I locked myself in. There was water flowing all over the floor in the hallway, coming from under the bathroom door. I could hear the shower running. I understood what probably happened. After a Saturday evening with way too much alcohol, the woman living there must have fallen asleep, or in a coma, in the shower, covering the drain with her body. I couldn't make contact with her. I didn't dare to pick the lock to get into the bathroom. I realized that in case of an emergency, I would have to get in there. I decided to try something else first. I closed off the apartment's hot water. I will never forget the resulting scream when she was showered with cold water. So funny. I was now able to talk to her, and after a couple of minutes of swearing and drying herself off, she came out of the bathroom confirming my suspicions of what had happened. I'm not a doctor, and she was young and healthy, so I decided she didn't need further medical help. In hindsight, I know that might not have been my wisest decision, but fortunately it ended well. Needless to say, she was very embarrassed, and the whole ordeal ended up costing her quite some money. The floors had to be replaced both in her apartment hallway and in the apartment of the person that contacted me. Hopefully she will think twice about taking a shower while being that intoxicated. Or not. I guess one doesn't really think that clearly under such conditions. Whilst I had a job like this, the thing that surprised and shocked me most wasn't work related. My wife's best friend, who I also knew for a few years before I met my wife, had some issues with mental health and didn't have a huge support network. We were close with her, we all spent a lot of time around each other's places, etc. Her son, whose dad wasn't in the picture, suddenly came down really ill and had to go to a specialist children's hospital far from home. We looked after her other boy for 2 weeks, as well as did various bits to help out at her request / with permission, etc. Such as laundry, tidying her flat, etc. Mostly my wife, as I was working most of the time. She asked that we got her laptop out of the flat and gave it to her dad as he passed through on the way to visit. My wife, unfortunately, came down unwell, so I took a day off work to help with the kids and some of the errands / tasks, etc. I was told she normally kept the laptop in her room, either on the cabinet or under the bed. It wasn't on the cabinet, so I looked under the bed and pulled out a small case, which was the only thing there I'd expect to find the laptop in. However, it wasn't a laptop in the case. It was a series of such toys, which isn't the weird part. The weird part was that there were also lots of photo printouts from either my or my wife's social media, or from trips we'd done together. It instantly became clear that her attachment to me, and possibly my wife too, although judging from the way some of the pictures had been folded, less likely, was more than just friendly. She'd had a particularly tough time, so I never said anything about it. I put it all back and pretended like I'd never seen it, hence using a throwaway for this. I did home-based work in my early social work days. I saw a lot of hoarding and unsafe living conditions. The smell of cockroaches still haunts my memory, but one of the worst was an apartment with lots of animals, dogs, cats, birds flying around. They just urinated and defecated on the floor, and the people would just put a newspaper over the top of it, but never clean it. So the floor was literally layers and layers of crusty, rotting newspaper. The stench was unbearable. We actually didn't venture far into the home because it wasn't safe enough for the purpose of our visit. Had to call police, SPCAP, and hazmat. Another one was strange. It was 2 people who lived in this big old Victorian home. The furniture looked straight out the Victorian era, and there was inches of dust on everything. It looked like the house was unlived in. It wasn't cluttered at all. In fact, no books, papers, etc. The people were sitting on the couch in the living room, but every hard surface had a thick coating of dust and looked like it hadn't been touched in years, like decades maybe. It was a sunny day, and the sun was steaming through the windows, and the dust particles in the air looked like a haze. It was so thick. The worst was it smelled like a dirty scalp. The people were so strange too. Reminded me of Stepford Wives. I read one where they had to go to a trailer with no stairs, and I had one of those too. That wasn't too bad, but it was in the middle of nowhere. It was literally off a rural county highway with no population onto a dirt road, onto another dirt road. I had to drive by a trailer with a bunch of old cars rotting in the yard. Half the time there would be like 10 guys out there watching me drive by. I'm a woman, and was young at the time. No cell service back then. I started making sure the doors were locked when I turned down the road, and always had it in 4-wheel drive in case I had to haul ass out of there. My husband gave me a serious knife to keep in my car. I used to do home visits in an urban area as well, and would go into some pretty dangerous parts of town, even at night, because we did crisis work. But I was always the most scared going to that family out in the middle of nowhere. There were 2 very rural trailer parks we're not allowed to make home visits to, as they were so dangerous to the workers. These enclave mountain towns, where people have been living on their own for decades. Even the police wouldn't go anymore, and as we needed an escort, we couldn't go. All those kids just left out there. Oh my god, I have such a good one. So I work in architecture, and my firm does a lot of remodels. This often means that we have to go to the house we're remodeling and measure it from the inside out, as well as take as many pictures as reasonably possible. Mostly it's either adding a bedroom or redoing the basement, relatively minor things, but this one, which we'll call the mountain house, was an absolute doozy. The house itself was on a gorgeous plot of land, about an acre in the foothills of my state, super nice and very in demand area. Very old money too. There was a full-on stream, a gazebo, pool with pool house, and a view of the whole county. Now onto the weird sheet. First off, the house was about 9,000 square feet. Absolutely massive. It had a massive loft and an even bigger basement. No biggie so far. Here's where the weird begins. The kitchen / dining / living room package was all one room, about 100 foot by 100 foot. It had a vaulted ceiling, but the house was designed in like the 70s, and they didn't have the engineering capacity to fully vault the room, so they put up 2 steel posts at the peak of the room. However, since the room was so big, the peak of the vault was about 25 feet up, so these 2 posts looked very similar to a guillotine stand. Second, the basement had what we called a kill and disposal room. It was a room in the basement with no windows, 1 door. The entire room was made of concrete and there was no carpet. The only major defining features in the room were a single water pipe from floor to ceiling in the corner of the room, a very small hatch in the wall going to the crawl space that when closed, looked like a door to a cremation machine thing, and a locked floor safe below the incinerator hatch. Super weird. Owners couldn't give us an explanation on the room itself. Third weird thing, not necessarily creepy, but way more off-putting. Almost all the angles in the house were off. We had rooms built like uneven pentagons. Think the shape of Superman's symbol. The stairs intersected the floor at an 80-degree angle. There were rooms that intersected with the rest of the house at similarly odd angles. Spaces between walls were unaccounted for. As if there were blocked off hallways or rooms. Almost all the bathrooms had a sink and mirrors in water closets as opposed to toilets and baths. They had full floor to ceiling windows that turned out to be French doors sealed together with the handles taken off. Every time you went into this house it never felt creepy, so to say, more so just weird and off-putting, like it was unnatural through and through. Used to be a Dell on-site warranty technician. I live in a rural area so was required to drive long distances to other mining / farming town. The weirdest in terms of location was a massive empty property, no house to be seen, but I finally came across a barn. A lady comes out and escorts me into the barn, where a caravan was, and inside the caravan was the laptop. She sat beside me the whole time in a stuffy caravan, while I pulled her laptop apart. Another was to a property way off road, so the guy was to meet me on the highway and I'd follow him back to the property. We meet up, and I'm following him. Next minute I noticed he's going faster and faster, so like an idiot I went faster and faster to keep up. He ended up getting up to 160 km/h when I saw the road turn to dirt as a big dust cloud appeared behind him. Also like an idiot I slammed on the brakes and the car began spinning. Luckily stayed mostly on the road, regained my composure and slowly started following him again. He was long gone, but I could still see a dust cloud of where he was. He was in a ute, and I was in a Commodore. The road got so bad I could hear the ground and rocks scraping along the bottom of the car. After zigzagging down dirt roads for what felt like an eternity I finally reached his property. The home was completely empty except for a single table in the middle of the room with the laptop on it. Also seen a hoarder's house as bad as you'd see on TV. Literal piles of garbage from wall to wall with only a path carved out from the front door, to the couch in the lunch room, and to the bed. Kitchen was fully blocked off with yellow gunk caked all over the walls. I had to have a shower before I did any more calls that day. I work for a high-end real estate agent, not the US, Europe. I routinely see the in-house cinema rooms, wine cellars, indoor swimming pools and wellness wings with saunas, steam rooms, and whirlpools. Might have seen some original sketches by Van Gogh and Rembrandt. Lots of Italian and Spanish marble too, and walk-in closets the size of my not shabby living room, even classy with high fashion logos on the walls. Even some flooring from medieval castles, I kid you not. The gardens can be park-like, but it's not so much the richness. It's the people living there. You can sense when they are unhappy, looking for the next villa or mansion that's going to make them happy. Or the second wife that wants to put her stamp on the home, eradicating the first wife that helped build the fortune. Love the movie First Wives Club, with Ivana saying back quote, "Don't get mad, get everything." Last week I was in a stunning villa that the girlfriend of 20 years of the deceased owner has to leave because his children from his first wife, who died young, want to sell. She had a live-in best girlfriend who helped her manage the move out, etc. Yeah, right. There was only one bedroom in use, and her reaction to me telling about myself, back quote, "no husband and no kids," was quite adamant. She wanted to have a get-together dinner with the all-female real estate team when the villa sells. Fine by me. I visit my best girlfriend in the US yearly for a month, but not my cup of tea though. Oh boy, I have so many funny ones. I used to work for local government as a tax assessor. Part of the job required visits to properties, but we did not make appointments. That made for a lot of surprise inspections of otherwise secluded or private properties. Once knocked on a door to announce myself. There were no steps, so I was standing on the bare ground and the bottom of the door was just below waist high. That meant that, when the owner opened up the door, I had an eye-level view of his lime green unders-covered crotch and nothing else on that 400-pound body. Want to gouge out my mind's eye every time I think about that one. Another time, I showed up, knocked and no one answered. So I walked around back to measure their new pool, only to find the lady of the house in the pool with 2 other men, and no swimwear in sight. Neither of them were her husband, not that it's my business. I only knew it because the Mr. and Mrs. always sit in front of me in church. Lol. Last one, I once had to measure a new house that was being built to look like a castle. 3 stories with a full basement. Underground tunnels connected the 4-car carriage house, the main house, the caretaker's tunnel, and the guest house. I walked through all of them with only a flashlight, since the electric wasn't turned on in those areas yet. Met up with a butt-naked young man who was sneaking out of the caretaker's house. Turns out, he was newly hired on to oversee the landscaping, and was already tangled up with the owner's son. He made his quick exit, because they had almost gotten caught by the son's girlfriend. Recently started a new job as a contractor with a couple of friends of mine. It's general contracting. So we go in and fix up places where people have recently moved out, or evicted, or just abandoned the place, to fix what needs to be fixed, and then move on. We had a particular house in an area close to university, college dorms, as well as some townhomes etc. that we were given throughout parent company. On the outside it seemed well enough, but the inside, nightmarish. There were scrawlings on the walls leading up to the upstairs rooms covering both sides of the stairway that mentioned someone named Sarah, and how to worship her, and how lovely she was, as well as many depictions of a person named Stephen that was scratched out, or otherwise brutalized, after it was written on the walls. I found a journal filled with creepy images of creatures from fever dreams as well as some pretty nice poetry, which was strange. Maybe a therapy journal or something. The rest of the house was covered in potting soil, cat sheet, and other articles of clothing, both outerwear and private wear, as well as I think some blood stains on the utterly destroyed couch that was overturned, and piercing through a TV that had crashed to the ground from a wall stand. Oh yeah, can't forget about the broken glass everywhere on the ground floor. While sorting through and removing all the destroyed furniture, we found the ID of the residents that used to live there. I won't say a name, but they were going to university to help the mentally ill. I think that's what creeped me out the most about the whole thing, as apparently this person lived alone. Not my story, but my grandfather's also serious TW on this one. Have a bath bucket ready, I warned you. He was a cop in Florida in the 70s and 80s, and he gets assigned a foul odor call. Anyone who's ever worked law enforcement or fire rescue already knows what a foul odor call ends up being 99 times out of 100. So they get there, and the neighbor says they haven't heard from their neighbor for a few days now, but something smells awful from the upstairs apartment. I should also mention this was Florida, in May in the 70s, in an apartment building that didn't have air conditioning. Seriously, get something to hurl into the first responders reading this story are like, yup, step ahead of you, dude. So they go into the living room, nada. Bedroom, nada. Turns out this guy had felt dirty towards the end and decided to take a bath and subsequently died in the bath about 4 or 5 days ago. So my grandfather is pretty sure it's natural causes, but he still has to like dust for prints or whatever to make sure it's not foul play, while the two paramedics are figuring out how to get the ex-person out of the bathtub. Seriously, it gets gross from here on out, so they decide that, since he's pretty heavy, they are gonna climb onto the corners of the tub and hoist him directly out of the tub and onto the stretcher. So they climb up onto the corners of the tub, and as they are up there, one of the paramedics loses his footing and slips. Another fun fact about bloated gassy corpses, they are pretty fragile. So this paramedic slips and falls and lands right on the dead dude, who, in the words of my grandpa, burst open like a water balloon. Apparently they all immediately ran outside and spent the better part of the next hour just vomiting. So yeah, burst dead person would probably be my grandfather's weirdest/worst. As a young man, I sold vacuum cleaners for a few months. $1,600 machines in the 90s. Crazy expensive. A Hyundai Excel, popular low-cost car then, was like $6,000. No way a vacuum was 1/4 that. So I found myself in a sketchy house. Furniture was beat up, holes in the walls, stains all over everything. Everything about it was, these people are scraping by. I don't judge, but I was pitching a $1,600 vacuum cleaner that most get by with a $40 one. So yeah, the wife wants it. Has to have. The demo guilts mom into thinking she's poisoning her kids without it. Probably in her mind this was going to solve a lot of her guilt. Comes time to pay. So most people take it on finance credit, but normally you put some down. Husband tries to justify to himself, well, if they approve it and we pay over time, it will help our credit rating. They don't have a checking act, paycheck to paycheck, and probably always behind. I'm like 21, and in my mind I'm thinking, how the heck you buying a $1,600 thing you don't need when you are living like this? But the financing is done with the office on the phone. I left that night with them still working it out, but sure enough the next day they closed the deal. I quit a few days later. It just didn't feel right. I have a few good ones. In the summer of 2001 I was delivering pizzas between semesters. I went to an apartment complex that was occupied by elderly and disabled people. This man came to the door and asked me to come inside while he looked for his money. I wasn't supposed to go inside, but I gathered that the guy was legally blind, and I didn't feel threatened at all, so I stepped into the living room. He rustled around on the counter, leaning down really close to see things, then stepped out of the room. On the coffee table I spotted a huge glass vase filled to the brim with big fat rolled joints. Probably at least 100 of them. This was before it was legalized anywhere, even for medical use, so I was shocked. I suddenly felt like I was being set up on an honesty test or something. This was a heavy weed smoking period for me. I had probably smoked on the way to the delivery address. Dude is literally blind and has stepped out of the room, and I'm here with a mountain of weed. So tempting to snatch a couple and stick them in my pocket, but I didn't. Now I sell real estate, so usually when I get to a house it's in its best condition, but once in a while I see something weird. One time I was showing a mostly vacant house and there were guns everywhere. Handguns on the kitchen counter. Rifles leaning against the wall in every room. Guns on top of the fridge. Guns on gun racks. Guns stacked everywhere. The worst thing I've seen was in a house I visited for a company that buys foreclosures. This family had lost the house, but were still occupying it, and I was there to gather info, take pics, etc. The house was falling apart. There were massive holes in the ceiling with buckets and plastic tubs collecting rainwater, mold, mildew, obvious signs of termite infestation, and they had about 5 big dogs inside, penned in a tiny little hallway. The flooring had been ripped up, and the concrete slab was exposed, and the concrete was completely covered in dog piss and sheet. Absolutely saturated with it. The smell was overwhelming. and there was so much of it that I literally could not find a spot to step between piles of piss and sheet to cross the hallway without stepping in it. The woman apologized for not cleaning up before I came, saying she'd had to work late, as if this mess was something she would normally clean up after work. The odor was so strong that I could smell it on my clothes after I left. I had to go home to shower and change clothes before my next appointment. I'm sure I have some other stories, but that one still stands out. In college I worked as a student worker in it and helped students in dorms get their computer connected to the internet. We had 2 rules. Never be in a dorm room without the resident and always have a coworker with you when in a dorm. Within the first month my coworker and I were sent to one of the sorority dorms. We knocked on this chic door a couple times and got no answer, so we were heading out. On the way a sheik comes out of the showers in just a towel and says she's the one we are there to help and to follow her. So we tell her sorry we can't come in your room with you not dressed. So she says she doesn't care. We said we do. After a couple back and forths we give up and just go in so we don't have to come back another time. It took maybe a minute before we both saw her vulva. She realized we saw and she didn't care. So she just went ahead and took the towel off and got dressed with us there. After we got back to the office we told our boss what happened for Saya, and he was like, "Don't worry guys. That happens. It's college. That's why you go together in case something happens or you get accused of something." I also had a time we went to the dorms the soccer team stayed in and it looked like a disaster film. While we were there we heard the story. Some of the players got busted with booze and got pissed. So they wrecked the place. I know this aren't as wild as some of the others, but geez I had to post something that wasn't depressing. I'm always late to the party, but I have so many stories of funny stuff I've seen when in people's houses. Weirdest one was where I thought a dude was being held in a makeshift prison in the garage. When I was a property manager I went into a house in a decent enough neighborhood. It was hot as hell outside, which is somewhat important to this story. Well, I was doing what is called a mid-lease walkthrough. The tenant knew that I was coming and just asked that I didn't let the cats out by accident because he was going to be at work. He was the only one on the lease. The house looks pretty normal and kept up nice enough. I wanted to see if he was changing the filters though, and this one was in the attic with access located in the garage. When I walked into the garage I was immediately met with a wall made of coats board tied together with trash bag and tape. It was the wall that allowed me to walk around the edge of the room. I could see about 6 inches between the top of this wall and the ceiling. There was a light on in its enclosure. I was startled by this and assumed maybe he was growing pot or something. I make my way around and found a door which was a cardboard box flattened out. I could open it, but if I had I'm pretty sure the whole thing would have fallen down. I pulled a flap down enough to see a guy sleeping on a cot with a TV on top of a cardboard box, which was strange with the light on. It had to have been 90 degrees in this garage as it was summer at the time. I yelled out to this guy sleeping because I thought he was dead. How else could a person sleep in a garage like this? He woke up after a minute of yelling. He said he was visiting his dad and wasn't allowed to stay in the house. The extra bedroom was the cat's room. This lined up because the extra room was in fact dedicated to cat scratching post houses. I asked him if he was okay and needed help. Asked him if he was there against his will. He said no and opened the door and met me. We talked and I opened the garage door and offered him a ride anywhere. He insisted that no, he was just visiting. I immediately left and went to the office. I called the police on my way there to request a wellness visit. I met them there, but didn't walk through the house with them. I let them in, which may have been a bad idea, but I genuinely thought this person was being held against their will. The tenant, turns out, just didn't want to let him stay in the house because he isn't allowed long-term visitors. This is pretty standard on a lease, but most people don't take it so literally. I went back a week later to look at the filter again. My excuse: he let the guy move in, and it turns out it was not his son, but definitely a boy toy situation faking weird. Electrician here. I once went to an apartment to check why some rooms didn't have power. First what the fuck moment was the note on the door that basically they worked nights and could sleep through being dragged across a fire. Weird, but whatever. After walking in the door, this dude is passed out on the couch bare as. Just full moon to the face. Okay, this call sucks, but usually it's an easy fix and I'll be out in no time. Scan the room looking for usual panel locations. Figure it's in a bedroom. Walk towards a bedroom and see an empty sex toy package. Firefly vibrator. Cool, whatever floats your boat. Get to the fuse box, yes actual fuses, and saw a couple fuses missing. So I changed to the fuses that were there around and checked for power around the apartment. Everything is working as far as I can tell. I look around the closet the fuse box is in to see if the fuses were just removed. Nothing on the floor or in the box. I reach up on the shelf that I can't quite see the top of. There is a pink something in a bag. I grab it and it feels slick and squishy. I pull it off the shelf. I just want to reiterate that it was in a bag and I'm holding one of those sex toys that's a mold of the upper thigh and genitals. Just in a bag of lube and I don't know if it's used or what. I throw that thing back, quickly leave the apartment, call my boss to jokingly ask why he hates me, relay the story, go grab some fuses, put gloves, booties, face mask, almost micro space coveralls on, stick the fuses in and bounce. I feel like I'm obligated to answer this one. My family owns and manages apartment buildings. Once when I was around 10 years old, we went to go check on a tenant who religiously paid his rent on time and at that point had been a month late and we had heard nothing from him. My dad and I went to do a health check on the tenant and being how much dad assumed the tenant was dead, he did not allow me to go inside. As he walked in I just hear him say, Jesus faking Christ. Stay outside. I'm sitting outside dying to go in when he finally comes out and lets me come inside. The entire apartment was filled with thousands of guns and boxes of ammunition of all different shapes and sizes. There was a rocket launcher on his bed and his bathtub was filled with ammunition and hand grenades. The most memorable part for me was the pictures of nude women on the walls in the apartment though. Me and my dad were having a heyday looking at all the different stuff when my dad noticed a case of gunpowder on the kitchen counter. He opened up a cabinet to find the entire kitchen was used to store cases of gunpowder. At this point we realize that this entire apartment is basically one lead cigarette away from blowing up the entire block, so we had to evacuate the entire building and get the police and bomb squad there. They confiscated everything as most of it was not legal to own besides the ammunition, and we were forced to evict the guy who never showed up again. The only thing we had of his left was his business card, which I will never forget, said professional adventurer, expert treasure hunter and freelance bartender. Have gun, will travel. I sold life insurance. They said it wasn't cold calling, but it was. I had to set appointments to go into people's homes. I went to a house that filled my quota. It was a home for a little old lady. The sweetest hoarder I have ever experienced in my life. She met me at the door, but when I walked in I was shocked. An immediate path met me because trash and her memorable goods filled from my feet to the ceiling all the way from what I could see. I sat with her and chatted. I gave my sales pitch. She wanted policies for her grandchildren. Whole life so they accumulate cash. If they need to have some at the time it's there. My sales ploy to get a paycheck was there at the time. I had driven almost 3 hours for the appointment and the need for the bathroom was urgent. I was scared given the hallway house. I asked politely and she gave me directions on how to get there. Then she says without missing a beat, there is a bucket because the toilet doesn't flush, so you need to pour water down to let everything go down. The sink didn't work and it was a trip to get water. I don't know how she did it alone. The smell in the place was awful. When I asked about pets she said she used to have cats. The smell and the amount of things told me they were still there. She was 95. She had 4 kids. All seemed to be doing better than she was. This was based on what she told me starting these insurance policies. She had no money, they should have taken care of their mother. I'll never forget how I felt leaving that house. Met a guy who lived up the street years ago. He was a chef in a semi-fancy restaurant. He rented a small 1920s house that appeared to be in poor condition. One day I was driving past and he had removed the doors from the house and was burning them in a fire pit. I stopped and bought the doors off him as I thought I needed them for my own house and asked if I could buy the skirting boards. When I went inside the house to remove the skirting boards and at his insistence replace them with other timber to keep the wind out, I found that the entire house was empty and derelict. The kitchen was empty apart from a sink and a BBQ which he had been using indoors. The roof was black because of this. The only taps in the whole house was one in the kitchen and a tap in the bathroom. The only hot water came from a hot water system mounted above the bath with a tap draining directly into the bath. The toilet was a camping toilet outside. Walls had been removed with no attempt to cover the resultant holes in the roof. The walls were covered in bad angsty poetry and lap times of motorcycle races. The entire house was filthy, which was bizarre, since he was a well-presented, neat, well-spoken man. When he moved out, I went back to look at the house again and discovered the replacement skirting boards had big rat holes chewed through them already. It had only been a couple of weeks. I could hear rats in the ceiling, even though there was no person and thus no food there. Under the house, which was on a steep hill, barely any of the piers reached the house itself. The house is still there because it's heritage listed, although due to vandalism only the roof, broken windows and frame remains. Oh, my time to shine. I have been doing AC work for a long time. I've seen so many weird things. The first one that come to mind is a call I took out in the country at an old, beat up mobile home. This is normal for where I'm at, but this house was special. I was training a new guy, teaching him proper troubleshooting techniques. We walk in, and I start asking what the problem is. I've always been taught to be aware of my surroundings, so I'm scanning the room a little while talking to the woman. On the wall a picture catches my eye. It was an older wedding photo, black and white. On the woman's dress however were snakes. Not fake or embroidered snakes. Real damn snakes. I'm confused, but I shake that off. We head outside and I start working on the system. My trainee says, "Dude, did you see the bones?" "No, what bones?" He says, "In the cabinet." We go back in to tell them what we found, and sure enough, there is a large china cabinet full of random bones. Not like animal bones or fake collector things, not sure if that's a thing, but legit people bones. A hip bone and part of a skull stood out in particular. So as we're talking, I kinda couldn't leave it alone anymore. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but what's up with the bones?" "Oh." She was so excited to tell me about them. One day our dog brought back a bone from the woods. It seemed interesting, so we washed it off and kept it. Then for the next few days he just kept bringing back other bones. Even to this day, he still will bring back a new bone every now and then. My trainee said he left something in the truck and left pretty quickly. I wanted to ask if they ever thought about, contacting someone, but I decided to leave that alone in case they collected bones through different means. I fixed their system and left. As we were leaving, I noticed they had bones everywhere. There were bones on the wall, coffee table, even had a bone wind chime outside the door. I told the office to put them on the do not call list just in case, and haven't seen them since. TLDR, while working, found a family whose dog possibly dug up a shallow grave site and brought the bones back, which they kept and eat souvenirs. Oh boy, so I was a screen repair guy and never liked to use other people's bathrooms. This day I was working for a gay couple of guys who had 4 large, male and neutered dogs. I noticed, because I'm an advocate of pet adoption. Spay and neuter your pets, people. I was outside when it hit me. I need to sheet. I did the slow, careful walk to my van, opened the door, started climbing in, and something shifted. It was coming now. So I fast/slow/careful walk to the front door. I noticed one of the guys' cars was gone, so someone was home. Thank God. Banged on the front door, no answer. Rang the bell, no answer. Normally that's where I would stop, but this was some true emergency, so bell and pound on the door again. He finally comes to the door in a bathrobe, all the dogs at his heels. I explain the situation. He refuses. I explain that there is no other option and I insist. He begrudgingly lets me in and points down the hall. So, I have to say I'm super open-minded and have no problems with gays, and I tended to think of them as very clean, well-dressed and manicured. I push the bathroom door open, hit the lights, very dim bulbs, but I see the target. Seat already down. I drop my pants and drop on the seat without slowing down. Something is wrong. I slide across the seat, hit the wall next to the toilet, and crash to the floor, diarrhea exploding upon impact. What the fuck? I grab the seat to get my ass on the target before my sphincter betrays me yet again. My hand slips off. I scramble to my feet, avoiding the sheet on the floor best as possible. On the way back I notice a brown shine on the seat. Confused and in a panic I sit and sheet my brains out, sliding around with the least bit of pressure. As it faking finally passes, and I'm left looking around the dimly lit bathroom at the print of sheet on the floor to my left, and I realize I'm sitting, mortified, on a toilet seat covered in a light brown lubricant in a homosexual's house with 4 faking snipped male dogs. My mind goes to horrible places immediately. I get up, clean my ass and legs with toilet paper best as possible. Go to wash my hands and the white faking bar of soap is covered in streaks of brown lube. Slips out of my hands and falls in my sheet on the floor. Fuck this. I clean up the floor best I can. Leave the job, go home, and take a long hot ass shower. Throw out my pants and boxers. Hire a subcontractor to go finish the job, and I didn't even bill them. All I could think of was that dude getting gangbanged by those canines. One of the most traumatic days of my 22-year-old life up to that point. I worked at Aaron's Rentals when I was in my early 20s. I was tasked with collecting rent money or repossessing the items. Plenty of horror stories, but the most bizarre was going to an old rundown single wide trailer where I needed to pick up one of those big living room sound systems. As I pull up, this guy tells me to come on in and get the equipment, but watch out for the squirrels. I'm thinking this guy is high and just talking out of his head. As I get closer to the front door I notice he has his hand bandaged like an NFL lineman in the shape of a club. I ask what happened to his hand, and he replies, this GD squirrels man. Now I'm interested. Walk in the door, and there's 6 small trap cages in the living room floor, all empty. To the left of the cages is a stereo. As I'm unhooking everything I hear what I can only assume an Apache helicopter sounds like on startup. The craziest almost humming sound. I look around and see nothing but dust falling from up above. As I look up I see 2 wild grey squirrels fighting for dominance on the ceiling fan. I know you're thinking they're just a couple of squirrels. What's the big deal? Well, I only have vision on 2. Easy math. 6 cages equals 6 squirrels, right? The 2 I could see had the high ground and they had already tasted human blood. I noped out to that trailer and told the guy on the porch I'd just tell the boss that no one was home. I've never repeated this story until today. Now I have an uneasy feeling around any and all squirrels. I was working for this company moving furniture so the main company could redo the floors. I drove to this home and walk in and nothing is touched. Literally thought I was in the wrong house and I just broke in. Ended up being the right house and the family had terrible community skills between each other. We were on a time crunch, so we ended up moving all the large furniture out first day and charged them for 2 days. So they had another day to pack everything up so we can move it. Next day I come back and nothing was touched again. Made a couple calls and basically owner of the house said they'd pay extra for us to just move everything out ourselves, no boxes, just put everything in one room miscellaneous. So we did so and finished the entire downstairs relatively fast, and the upstairs was a bit harder with their rooms. Move into the son's room and boy was it messy. We had to go through everything. Moved almost all the furniture, and at this point we are about to move the big dresser, and behind the dresser was a bunch of condom wrappers. Okay, cool, this kid facts I guess, no, so we thought. We moved the bed out and all of a sudden we found a pocket bussy just laying behind the bed. To make things worse we found a tin in the closet full of his used condoms. The kid would use them on the pocket bussy and not throw them away, he'd keep them stored in a tin. I wasn't paid enough for this job and was the last one I did for the company. Also the dog was left in the house, not in the cage, and when we first walked in unknowingly the dog ran out and we spent the first 30 minutes chasing the dog around trying to get it back into the house. It was hell. I was doing a house call for a pretty disabled patient who was staying with their family. I pulled up, see a house with boarded up windows, CCTV cameras, and 2 large Dobermans chained in a pen. They assure me the dogs are secure, and we go inside. The patient lived on the porch. I do my work and it's determined the patient needs a special kind of equipment. So I call medical equipment provider to come and bring a loaner while we submit the paperwork for the patient to get a permanent one. While we wait, I start to become pretty aware of my surroundings. The grainy CC monitor on the wall, the disheveled appearance of the place, the odor. I'm pretty convinced there's a meth lab somewhere at this point. Suddenly their brother comes home. Apparently the patient didn't tell anyone I was coming. The brother quickly says hello and scurries downstairs as fast as he can. A few minutes later the sister comes home and immediately greeted me with who the fuck are you? I explain who I am, and she quickly places herself between me and the rest of the house, effectively keeping me in the porch, which I'm fine being closest to the exit. When the medical equipment guy comes, he recognizes my patient stating they went to high school together. When he says he recognizes the patient his face immediately dropped. As soon as I get my work done I get the heck out of there. Later I looked up my patient. They were a convicted murderer and prison had not been kind to them and I was in their house. I didn't come across anything overtly crazy. It was more like I inadvertently walked into someone's life. I was visiting an old guy in a retirement community. I was there to help fix some of his appliances. I used to do a thing on my own, where I would come to folks' houses to fix their electronics/appliances. This guy had a notebook of passwords I was tasked with finding, because he couldn't, and we needed it. He said I was free to look wherever, so I started looking where other books were. I found one that looked like a notebook. Of course, I opened it, and it was a journal. Dude was not having a great time. His wife, who was in the early stages of dementia, was really frustrating him, but he felt bad for expressing it, because he knew it wasn't her fault. But some of the stuff she was doing was pretty painful for him. Sometimes she would say hurtful things that only he would understand, like deeply personal. It was making him question whether their relationship had been totally real. Like he was having trouble keeping himself from thinking it meant something that she was saying those things. He was struggling with the idea of assisted living because he didn't want his wife to be alone, but also, he was realizing he wasn't capable of taking care of her in the long run. That's as far as I got. I couldn't keep going. I put the journal back where it was and looked again for the password book. Turns out it was in the kitchen the whole time. We got his stuff back in working order. It wasn't anything complicated. He paid double my rate and wouldn't accept me giving half back. Said that it didn't matter, that the work was easy, it did something that mattered. I had no means of helping him at the time, utterly none. I was doing what I was doing as a last-ditch effort to make some money, because I had been in a shit place for a while. Seeing what someone else was struggling with struck me deeply, and I worked a good bit harder afterward. There are times when things that would have been overwhelming before aren't now, because I remember how that moment felt. I do have a story about a blood computer, but it's technically not the right context for this question. I used to go into people's homes as a technician for a couple of different service providers, until I moved on to other things internally. I've seen it all. I think the weirdest and saddest thing was a nasty trailer park I was in. There were two really sketchy guys in a gross trailer that had bare plywood for floors because the carpet had been worn away long ago. It smelled something awful in there. They wanted the TVs in each of their rooms connected, and I asked them about a third room with a TV that had a woman laying on a bed, seemingly high as fuck, and dressed like she worked the streets. She didn't seem like she belonged with them at all. One of the men quickly shouted the hoe doesn't get cable in the most condescending way, and he mumbled some more derogatory terms about her that I can't remember now. My jaw dropped pretty low, luckily not far enough to hit the nasty floor. I basically threw wire down on the floor, huked everything up, and got out as quickly as I could. I don't know what was going on there, but something was really off, and after leaving it actually bothered me that any woman would even be in there with those two guys. I had another weirdo try showing me pictures of his new ex-wife that he hated while I was working, which I declined, because what the fuck. He then tried showing me bloodstains on the floor from where someone committed suicide, and I was like, well, it's time for me to go. I was assigned to go door to door in a nursing home to install equipment. I knocked on an elderly woman's door. She opened it, looked at me, and immediately passed out, hitting her head hard on the floor. I sent a coworker running for help, and a bunch of people came to assist me and took over from there. She had no recollection of what happened. I already had my qualms about going door to door installing digital boxes in a nursing home to try and milk PPV/VOD content out of old people on fixed incomes. So at that point I packed up my gear and went home for the rest of the day without telling anyone. I had another customer, completely drunk when I showed up, start telling me a story about how he had sexual relations with a 15-year-old and got arrested for rap. He said he got a big money lawyer and got off. I don't know why people tell complete strangers shit like that, but as I filled with rage I recorded the conversation and sent it to the police. I never heard anything back about it. I went to a very large house in a rich area, only to find the house completely filled with boxes and furniture up to the ceiling in every room. The woman living there had a major hoarding problem and was sitting on a kitchen chair in a space in her kitchen, watching a small TV on her stove. I had to go down to her basement, and it looked like some of the stuff down there had been there since the 1970s and 1980s judging by the bags and boxes it was in. And I have a lot more stories. I did this for 15 years, until I moved into another position. All in all, most people are decent people, but you never know what you're going to get. Besides the regular hoarders, hysterical divorcees that think they are being spied on and random gay porn? Not much. Most recently I had to disable Wi-Fi radios in someone's house in everything that had one. They claimed their new neighbors were a terroristic threat. In reality, they share an entry area outside in an L shape. New tenants are upstairs. They had a Ring doorbell or something put in, and it had to be mounted on the external part of said client's doorway. Client was positive this and a literal floodlight from the apartment complex was something sneaky from the new neighbors they were suspicious of. This was based on the doorbell and the new neighbors often pacing outside and on the phone. I figured out that the neighbors were walking around out there to not smoke inside their unit, and they just like using their phone outside. Instead I had to whisper while in the house so they wouldn't hear. I also couldn't say anything outside, especially about why I was there. The entire time the client was gravely serious and repeatedly told me they were not one of those hysterical crazy women or something to that effect. Luckily that's not the actual craziest thing I've seen or heard in 12 years. I'd have to really seriously think about it a while, so I just let them vent as I disabled Wi-Fi cards in their computers and turned off the Wi-Fi on their iPhone. Had to hardwire their printer too, you know, in case someone got into their printer to do some terrorism. Of course, this was mostly paranoia mixed with some mental health issues and a dose of latent racism for good measure. There was zero security risk. Oh, but they had a Roku in their bedroom, so let's make sure to leave that connected to Wi-Fi. One thing should be fine when we are worried about national security, right? Saturday I had another one, recently divorced, literally crying at me over the phone because I cannot legally make suggestions for camera placements in any home. This person was another recent divorcee who was positive their ex was. I don't know really. Their stories tend to blend together. I just do the work they pay for and let them talk when on site. I also learned the hard way my first year into never ever play a tape or disc left in a player of any sort, and always ask before grabbing content to demo anything. You never know what the hell you're going to pick up or find. One dude's entire room was coated with what looked to be baby powder. The next layer was mostly random porno tapes and DVDs. All kinds of unknown, repulsive smells. Saw a freshly installed stone facade over a fireplace being to fall down as we were inspecting it. My partner was on a ladder when it happened. On the opposite side of where a giant chunk fell. That was fun. Absolutely have been in homes of telecom executives. I used to cover a large range of one of the densest states in the country, who, you guessed it, are divorcing and positive their soon-to-be ex, also executive at the same company, has an entire team dedicated specifically to recording everything they are saying and doing. In ways that just were not possible a decade or more ago, or now. Replace routers and modems constantly when people mess up their password and claim they're hacked, so they go. Spent $400 to $700 on new gear for security. Then proceed to use a phone number for their Wi-Fi password or something dumb. Most of the above is kind of common. Crazy people and sites are kind of normal to come across working in the field or homes and businesses. After an indeterminate amount of time they all just blend together.